Thank you. And as I recall, the first step is a roll call.
Well, Director Weed, Vice President Weed, I do have some quick housekeeping remarks.
Oh, please.
Okay, so good evening. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this public meeting either by using the Zoom application or by telephone. If you're participating via Zoom, we ask that all participants mute their microphones unless speaking. You may be placed on mute by the district secretary. The district secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view the presentation materials as they're presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and you'll be called upon at the appropriate time. If you are participating via telephone, again, we ask that you put your phone on mute, and you may view the meeting agenda, the staff reports, and presentation materials, which have all been posted to the district website at acwd.org, and then follow along that way. This Zoom webinar is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. The board will be working through a full agenda this evening, including 3 closed session items that will be covered near the end of the meeting. And while the board convenes in closed session privately, members of the public may remain logged onto Zoom or stay on the phone to be informed of board reports once the closed sessions are concluded. Again, thank you for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Wong,
Here.
Zephy,
Here. Is Director Akbari expected here tonight?
and Akbari.
Not here, and I understand he is in transit on an airplane and will not be part of our meeting this evening.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right. The salute to the flag. Please join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This time we have public comments. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board? We had one text message of someone who was having difficulty connecting via the Safari software. Do we have any information related to that person?
Yes, Director Weed, that person was Brian Roth, and Brian has logged off the meeting, but submitted a comment related to our drought ordinance and related items. And so I will be asking our Director of Water Resources to read that comment aloud as that item is addressed on the agenda.
All right, thank you. Next, we move to the consent calendar. Is there any desire to add additional items?
Vice President Weed, we have a member of the public with his hand up.
Oh, good. Thank you for catching that. Please, that person could speak. Introduce yourself.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, this is Peter Dreckmeyer, Policy Director for the Tuolumne River Trust. Good evening, Director Weed. I obviously am focused on the Tuolumne River, but it's a little bit tied to Alameda Creek because the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission gets water from both sources. And I think this is the first time I've ever tuned into an Alameda County Water District meeting, which is probably because I think you guys do a good job. And you might have noticed you tend to hear more from people who have complaints. But I wanted to take a little time tonight to thank you, because I think you really are leaders on environmental issues. We ran the Silicon Valley Water Conservation Awards for 10 years, and I know that you and some of your employees were awarded. And I want to say that Director Weed, I think, is the most thoughtful and knowledgeable person on the BOSCA Board of Directors. So we're very fortunate to have him there, and you're well represented. And also, I've had the pleasure of meeting Director Sethi at some meetings in the past before COVID, and always enjoy seeing him and appreciate his values as well. I am a member of the Alameda Creek Alliance and a friend of Jeff Miller's, who was the founder and director. And I'm always pleased to hear about progress on fish passage in Alameda Creek. And I'm always pleased to see appreciation for the district in supporting those efforts and helping to fund them. So my message tonight is thank you, keep up the good work, and congratulations on having a great board of directors. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's an easy one. All right. If there are no other members of the public to speak, we can move on then to our consent calendar and ask if there's anyone who would like to add items to the consent calendar.
Director Weed, I just want to say, knowing Peter Dreckmeyer, I think fairly well in the environmental community, that is one of the nicest opening messages we've had at a board meeting that I can recall. Thank you so much, Mr. Dreckmeyer.
Thank you.
We work really hard at what we do, and that's your message is very much appreciated.
Thank you. We'll continue whatever communications, and appreciate the vote of confidence. So, if there's
Director Weed,
any
I'll go
other
ahead.
board member wishes to make a comment.
I'll go ahead and add item 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.4 to consent calendar for this evening.
Do we have a second?
I will second.
Do we have a
Correct.
motion? Okay. Roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended?
I'll move the motion to approve as amended.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. All right. I'll just then to go on to item 5.5, which is a proclamation of the Alameda County Water District, or presentation, excuse me, of the Alameda County Water District audited financial statements for the year 2020/21.
Thank you, Vice President Weed. This item will be introduced by our Director of Finance, John Wunderlich.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. So the district prepares an annual comprehensive financial report each year that is comprised of an introduction with an overview of the district and recent accomplishments, management analysis of the financial statements, the financial statements themselves, along with related notes, and statistical and historical information about the district. The PUN Group, the district's auditor, recently completed its audit of the district's financial statements and issued an unmodified opinion, which is the highest opinion we can receive. The auditor presented their results to the Finance Committee October 19th, 2021, and will provide a supplemental presentation during this evening's board meeting. Acceptance of the annual comprehensive financial report will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 3.3, promote financial transparency. And so the recommendation for the board this evening is by motion to accept the audited financial statements and accompanying reports for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. And also for the benefit of the public who may be with us this evening, the entire financial report is included within tonight's board packet. And so with that introduction, I'm pleased to introduce Mariana Grajeda, our accounting and treasury manager, as well as Vanessa Burke, our audit engagement partner with the PUN Group, to provide this evening's presentation.
All right, please.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich, and good evening, directors, members of the public, and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you the annual comprehensive financial report and the audit results for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. Joining me for this presentation is Vanessa Burke, a partner with the PUN Group. No, can you go back a couple of pages to the agenda? All right, so I'll just, our agenda for this evening is we're going to cover a financial overview of the annual comprehensive financial report. I will then turn it over to Mrs. Burke, who will go over the scope of the audit engagement and also present the results of the audit. Next page, please. For the financial overview, I will go over a condensed view of the three basic financial statements of the district. I will focus on items which had a significant change from the prior fiscal year and will provide explanations for those changes. With that said, let's get into the first statement. Next page. So the first statement that I'm going to go over is the statement of net position. This statement presents the assets, liabilities, deferred items, and the net position of the district at a specific point in time, which in this case is June 30, 2021. And for comparison, we have included June 30, 2020. The first item that I want to point out from this statement is the line item total assets and deferred outflows. As you can see, compared to last year, we had an increase of $33.7 million. This increase is mainly attributed to the line item called non-current assets, which saw an increase of $38.5 million when compared to last year. The cost of this increase is due to the increased activity in capital projects for the districts. Some of those projects included the rubber dam fish ladder, the Alvarado Nile seismic improvements, along with other projects. The increase in non-current assets was partially offset by a decrease in deferred outflows of resources. This line item represents pension and OPEB expenses, which have not been recognized in the current year, and they will be deferred and recognized over multiple years. The reason for the decrease is because some of those items actually completed the recognition period in the current year, and they are no longer deferred. So moving down to the total liabilities and deferred outflows, we notice that there's a decrease of $11.7 million compared to last year. The main reason for this decrease is due to the non-current liabilities, which resulted in a total decrease of $8.6 million due to the scheduled payments on the bonds and additional payments made for pension and OPEB liabilities. Adding to the decrease is the $4.4 million in deferred inflows. Similar to deferred outflows, these items are related to pension and OPEB, but they are income items that are not recognized in the current year, and instead they're amortized over multiple years. As I said, similar to the outflows, the reason why there's a decrease for this year is because some of those items were fully recognized in the current year and they're no longer deferred. As a result of these changes in assets, liabilities, and deferred items, we see that the district's total net position increased by $45.5 million as compared to last year. Next page, please. The second statement that I want to go over is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in net position. This statement provides information on the district's revenues and expenses for a period of one fiscal year. The information in the statement can be used to determine whether the district recovered all of its costs through its various revenue sources. On this statement, I want to direct your attention to the item called net income before capital contributions, which, as you can see, had a decrease of $19.6 million when compared to the same period last year. The decrease is attributed to an $11.7 million in operating expenses. I'm sorry, an increase of $11.7 million in operating expenses due to increased water costs, as well as increase in non-capital project expenses. In addition, we also had a decrease in non-operating revenues of $7.3 million compared to last year. And this change was the result of changes in the market value of investments, which caused an overall decrease in investment income.
This is Director Sethi. I would like to make a comment on this slide. May I do so?
Please.
So I attended the Finance Committee meeting recently when the auditor presented the results here for the last fiscal year. I attended as a member of the community, and so I did not make any comments in the meeting. I only listened in. I rarely do this, but I really did want to understand the state of our finances for the last fiscal year. In prior years, I have sat on the Finance Committee, but not the last 2 years. So I was very interested in the results of this meeting. And I make this comment to my board, my fellow colleagues, and the community and the staff. I argued strenuously last year for a 3% rate increase across the board, both the fixed charge and the commodity charge. And I said that there would be consequences if we did not do that rate increase, and that it would flow through all forthcoming years. What I want to state here is on this slide, it is very clear that our irresponsibility as a board last year has directly resulted in these impacts to our financials. And I'm very concerned about it. And I don't want to relitigate issues from prior year, but I'm just going to say I told you so. This is not how to properly manage a water district. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, is there any other board member wishes to make a comment? I'm in partial agreement with Director Sethi, but rather than try to go into the debate on the issues, with the total data, with the data forms we have here, it's difficult to make the full argument. So let us move on then with the presentation.
Director Weed, this is, may I make a comment? I agree we shouldn't go into this, but I'm just going to say that I think all the directors make that decision, understand the financial consequences. We weighed it, at least I'll say I weighed the financial consequences with affordability and make my own decision. And I will stand by that decision, but that's water under the bridge and we should move on. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And Director Gunther, no comment. Let us move then to the with the presentation.
I'll make just one quick comment, in that I think we're looking at rates right now, and we've discussed the rates going out into the future, and I'm satisfied where we are at the moment.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Is there anything more? Do we have more in the presentation on the audit?
Yeah, I'll continue. The next line item that I want to point out on this slide is the capital contributions, which partially offset the net income. And as you can see, it increased by $7.5 million compared to last year. And this is just due to additional grants that were received in the year for the various capital projects. Next page, please. Okay, so the third and last statement that I want to cover this evening is the statement of cash flows. So this statement provides information about cash received and used by operating, investing, and financing activities, as well as the net change in the district's cash balance during the fiscal year. So I won't spend too much time on the line items here, because a lot of the changes in these items correlate to the changes that I have already discussed For example, the decrease in the cash provided by operating activities is the result of the increased operating expenses, which I discussed in the previous slide. The only item that I want to point out here is that as of the end of the fiscal year, the district had a balance of cash of $33.1 million, which is a net decrease of $2.8 million compared to last year. Okay, so now I will turn it over to Mrs. Burke, who will go over the audit engagement and also report on the results of the audit.
Good evening, members of the board, chair, management, and constituents in the audience at tonight's meeting. I am Vanessa Burke. I'm the engagement partner. Besides me, your report actually gets reviewed by 2 additional partners in our firm. I have a concurring partner, which is Ken Poon. He is our firm's managing partner, and he's not with us tonight. But sends well wishes to everybody on the board and is trusting me to do the presentation, which I've done the last couple of years. So, and then I have an EQCR partner, Engagement Quality Control Review partner, does a 3rd review of your audit report. All of us are licensed CPAs in California and are members of our professional standards group. So I'm very pleased to be here. I think before I get into our scope of work, I just wanted to say with these few pages of this presentation, it really doesn't show the amount and level of work that goes into the audit process. It really is a 5 to 6 month process to get through an audit with a myriad of documents that are provided by your finance team and members in other departments to our team. So I really want to extend warm thanks to the team at Alameda County Water because without them, we wouldn't be here today. And without my team, and I have a large team behind me that supports me, and they're not present tonight, I just wanted to say thank you because it is a long process. In addition, this year is June 30th of 2021, and we're already at November 17th. And I think what we realize is this is the year we were starting to emerge from COVID, from the pandemic. Last year was the year where we went into the pandemic. And so we were learning how to redo our audit and our audit process to do it completely remote with your organization. So it was definitely a heavy lift to get from any kind of manual process or upload of documents to us in electronic format. So we've done that now twice. We do what this year, what we did was a hybrid approach where we came on site for some of the weeks of the audit, but not all of the time like we used to. We believe that's really our new normal for audit. I'll quickly go through what our scope of work entails so you know what we covered on the water district. Next slide. Our audit really covers 3 different areas. We have a financial statement audit, we have an examination engagement that we perform, and we also perform agreed upon procedures. These are all governed by different set of standards in the accounting and auditing world. The financial statement audit covers the annual comprehensive financial report, which you have in your packet. That's a new name, a new naming convention for it. It includes your report on internal controls over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters in accordance with government auditing standards. Those are the government standards issued under the yellow book, and that report is in your packet on page 206 of your PDF. It also includes an annual required communications report to the board of directors, or what we would call those charged with governance. So that's you, as well as we met with the finance committee and presented our required communications. That report is in your packet at page 203. The examination engagement is your debt compliance report. You can find that on page 196 of your agenda package. And really that's an examination of certain covenants related to your outstanding debt, which you had 2 series of outstanding debt that we inspected this year. The last is the agreed upon procedures report, and this is required. It's called the GAN limit for short. Agreed upon procedures means we agree on procedures with the league, that we're going to perform on the GAN limit and ensure that you're within those limits. We do perform the review of those procedures for your June 30th of 2022, because you issued the GAN limit with your budget and saying you're going to meet those. You're going to issue the GAN limit within the schedules within your budget process. That report can be found at page 198. Next slide, please. So I have the short part of this. You can go ahead to the next slide. John mentioned earlier that you received in the financial statements an unmodified opinion. I'll just clarify that what that means to you is that your financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. Material is a judgment made by the auditors as to what we would deem to be material errors or omissions in your financial statements. In addition, it means we looked at your significant accounting policies as described in the notes to the financial statements and considered whether those were consistently applied between the 2 years in determining the amounts that are reported in your financial statements. We also look at estimates that are included in the financial statements. Those that we deem to be significant are included in that annual required communications to you. And so we call those out so that you're aware of those. In addition, we look at consistency in disclosures and ensure that you have appropriate disclosures in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. GAAP is the short name for that, and your GAAP is set by the standard setters at the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They're the ones that drive that. And then last, we look at compliance as it relates to any federal, any kind of laws and regulations that you might be subject to under the yellow book. We do consider that as part of our internal control opinion. So in all of that, your unmodified opinion is issued. There is no other place you can get any higher than that. So I congratulate the finance team and management and everybody for working hard. The examination engagement on debt, we looked at 2 pieces of debt. You'll see that in the report. There were 3 last year. The 2009 debt was paid off, and so it is not included in this year's report. So that is the change. You received an unmodified opinion on the examination engagement. For the agreed upon procedures engagement, the GAN limit, when we applied those procedures, we did not find any exceptions that we would need to report to you. And then last, everybody's always interested in internal controls and compliance under government auditing standards. And in accordance with our standards, we would be required to report in writing any items in your internal control that we deem to be significant deficiencies and or material weaknesses to your financial statements. We did not have any internal control findings that rose to that level. And so that there are no findings in that report. Of course, during our audit, we always will come across things that are areas for improvement. We have those discussions with management. We consider those other matters, but they don't rise to that level to be reported to those charged with governance. And we do talk with finance committee if need be on those matters. So with that, it is a fantastic audit. Again, the effort into it is pretty significant. And so I really appreciate your time tonight. And that completes our prepared remarks. We'll open it up for any further questions or questions from on the agenda item.
I remove myself from mute. Is there any public comment related to this presentation? There being none, is there any board comment related to it?
I'd like to thank the staff. It looks like a pretty good report. A lot of effort. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One sheet which I did not see here and may not be appropriate for the audit, but was shown as our financial reports and may come up and influence on a later item on this agenda, is the amount of money that we have in our rate stabilization reserve. Is that spelled out in this presentation? And if not, I'll raise the issue later.
Yeah, Director Weed, I can address that. The reserves are reported as are reported as part of our budget reports on a cash basis. The audit is on an accrual basis and does not specifically break out those different reserve funds.
All right, thank you. Okay, is that being the presentation?
I would like to make a short statement, Director Sethi here. And I say this without trying to insult my fellow board members, but I was very perturbed during our discussions in discussing about future rates in the most recent meetings, where frankly, I thought board members were being hypocritical considering how they voted last year on no rate increase across the board. And then we're trying to make the same arguments that I made last year as to the flow through on revenue for subsequent years and how we need to manage our rate increases. And the very directors on the board that compromised us last year were making 180-degree arguments in the other direction in our most recent meetings that are leading up to our December determination as to whether we and how we increase our rates. And again, I find it very irresponsible of the board, and you see it on slide number 5 that was presented here, what the negative consequences were to our decision last year. That was a 3-2 decision on the part of the board.
Might be
I feel
helpful
that
to
it has a lot of future consequences for our district. And that's why I sat in as a member of the public when this auditor report was made to our finance committee.
Director
And
Sethi, if you're going to mention a specific slide, let's see where the staff can bring up slide number 5.
I just want to stress how concerned I am. I consider myself a friend of everyone on our board, but I just want to reflect on what we did last year so we don't repeat these mistakes in the future. And so I'm trying to encourage us wholeheartedly, please, let's, we can talk about affordability and all these other issues in the community, but there are many ways to handle this aside from being negligent as a board in our responsibility to meeting the financial considerations of the district. And I will leave it at that. And I'm sorry if anybody is offended on my board or in the public, but I feel it's my responsibility to speak up here because I forecasted this last year. And these are the consequences of our decision from the past year. Thank you.
Director Weed, if
We
I
have
may.
the opportunity to bring up slide number 5.
So I do have a request for Vice President Ween. I would request that directors respect each other's difference in opinion. Using words like negligent and irresponsible when we have difference in opinion, I think that's going overboard. I would suggest our customers go back to the rate workshop and listen to the financial analysis presented by the staff and the in-depth discussion between the board members before we arrive at that decision. I don't believe there are negligence there, nor was it irresponsible. The amount of effort we went through to make that decision, it was not made lightly, as implied here. There's no negligence in here. We worked hard. We had a long and drawn out discussion before we decided not to have that rate increase. Having it described as a negligent and irresponsible decision, I do take offense to that. We all work hard as 5 directors. I would ask that we respect each other's difference in opinion, as I would respect Director Sethi's opinion for sure. Thank you.
Director Wong, I'm going to rebut your statement here very directly in that the staff did not recommend what the board approved. They were recommending what Director Weed and I were both supporting of staff. And 3 members of the board disregarded the staff recommendation, or recommendations in plural. And so we proceeded further along these lines. And that's why we see the negative numbers that we see on this chart right now. And I respect you, Director Wong. We're friends on the board. So I'm not
We
trying
are.
to disrespect anybody. I'm just trying to call us out on the carpet when it's necessary to say, hey, you know what? We had our disagreements last year. It was a 3-2 vote on the board. But these are the consequences of our decisions that we make for the public. And so I step in right now where I want to have us look ourselves in the mirror so that we don't make these consequential mistakes in the future. And I'll leave it at that.
Director
And I-
Steffi, I was the swing vote that night. And
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I have some issues with what you said tonight too. 1 year does not make a district. And you know what? Yeah, we're negative this year. And I've been on the board for a while, and I voted with you in the last meeting and where we're going. And I probably will. I respect your opinion. However, I wish you would respect mine. And tonight you're not. And you know what? That's past history. And the numbers are what they are. And certain things went certain ways. Now, I personally do not remember us going against the staff recommendation. Truly, I don't remember that. But that's past history. It's in another meeting. I'm not about to adjust and discuss that tonight. I want to move on. This is a great report, and we've already discussed rates. We're going to have another shot at it soon. And I think we need to keep looking in the future rather than keep digging up the past and calling other directors irresponsible. I'm sorry, Paul. I respect you. I like what you do. But you know what? That's kind of got me going a little bit tonight. And for that, I'm going to stop at that point right now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm glad we pulled up slide number 5. We are not negative this year. We're still positive. We're not as positive as we were the prior year. If you look at our net operating income versus expenses, we were up $1 million per month this year. Last year, $2 million per month. But the trend is down because of for a variety of reasons, including sales. I've argued for a long time that our board policies are disconnected from our operations, and that we do not match operating income with operating expenses and fixed income with fixed expenses, with fixed income with fixed expenses and variable income with variable expenses. That results in wild flames. We're seeing the effect of that here, but from a net position, we are still in a very positive mode. We $45 million change in our total net this year, $57 million last year, over $50 million in the prior 2 years. We've done very, very well from a financial standpoint. We've got rooms to be disconnected in our rate structure from our operations, as long as that disconnection is so far to the positive. But if we go into a drought, God help us, we'll go into the same things we had in the years 13, 14, 15, and into 16, where we had a $60 million shortfall with no way to cover it out of our rates. So let us move ahead with our audit. It's an opportunity to talk about these things, but our books are accurate, and I thank the auditors for their work.
Director Weed is a member of the public who has their hand raised.
Please, the member of the public, please introduce yourself.
Hello, Acting President Weed. This is Ken Ann. I decided to chime in because I'm just listening to the back and forth between the directors. And I think, I thank you for bringing up the point that, the district is still positive, not as positive as 2020, but it is still positive. And, I've been watching as a member of the public, the entire rate setting and financial workshops. And I do recall that meeting that Director Sethi refers to, and the staff did bring up the long-term financial models. And if I recall correctly, even, we ran through several different scenarios, and all of them had the district reserves well above the target, even accounting for purchasing that piece of property, which fortunately is no longer a factor. So, taking that issue off the table should give the district, as you say, plenty of margin. As you said, the district is in good financial shape. And to the comment that was made about following staff recommendation or not, the role of the board of directors is to represent the public, not to rubber stamp what staff says. So as a member of the public, I expect each director to represent the interests of the public, right? And if 3 out of 5 directors believe that it was in the interest of the public to forego a rate increase in 2021 to respond to the unprecedented COVID pandemic, so be it. That is the role of the directors, to represent the public. I respect the role of the staff. The staff of the ACWD is an excellent staff, but they are the staff and they present the staff's recommendation. It is up to the board to listen to that staff recommendation, but at the same time, represent the public that puts them in that position. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any other comment on the item of the audit? If not, do we have a motion to accept the audit?
I'll make the motion to accept the audit.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Roll call, please.
Directors Gunter,
Aye.
Wong,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and and Weed.
Aye.
Sorry.
Director Akbari not being with us this evening. Item 5.6 is a resolution authorizing the renewal of a line of credit for 1 year in an amount of $10 million and approving the execution and delivery of certain documents in connection therewith. Staff?
Yes, and Vice President Weed, this will be also introduced by our Director of Finance, Jonathan Werder.
Great, good evening. So the district first established a 10 million emergency line of credit with its banking provider, JP Morgan, back in 2017. The line of credit does require annual renewals and was renewed in 2018, 2019, and again last year. And so to maintain the emergency line of credit into the next calendar year, it must be renewed again. Based on current market conditions, JP Morgan proposes to increase the annual cost of maintaining the line of credit to $57,000. There's also an additional $15,000 in legal fees, which is an increase in prior years because much of the contract has to be rewritten due to some changes in financial industry benchmarks. There is sufficient funding in the district budget for this expense, and this item was reviewed with the Finance Committee October 19th. And renewing the line of credit will assist in meeting the district's strategic plan goal 1.3, continuously improve emergency preparedness and response capabilities. And so the recommendation this evening is by motion. 1, adopt a resolution that A, authorizes the renewal of an existing line of credit in an amount up to 10 million. B, makes certain other findings in connection therewith. And C, approves the execution and delivery of certain documents in connection therewith. And 2, authorize the general manager to execute a contract amendment with JP Morgan to renew the line of credit for the period of December 24th, 2021 through December 23rd, 2022 for a total cost, including the undrawn fee as well as the legal fees, for a total cost not to exceed $72,000. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on this item.
All right, is there any member of the public wishes to address the item? If not, let us move then to the members of the board. Is there any board questions related to this?
I believe Director Sethi was very instrumental in bringing this forward a few years ago, and I agree with him. And while I personally don't have any issue with this, I am highly interested in his opinion of the changes, and hopefully, I mean, we don't always agree on everything, but I do trust his opinion on this, and I would love to hear it. Thank you.
Director Sethi?
Well, thank you, Director Gunther. I did initiate this effort a few years back, and I'm very supportive of approving of the staff recommendation. And in fact, I'll make the motion to approve that if there's a second. But I will say to Mr. Wunderlich, I'm a little concerned about $72,000 being spent to revise everything right now, because that actually is an interest cost consideration that I think is fairly high on a $10 million line of credit here. That concerns me, even though I will go ahead and approve it. But spending $72,000 in terms of legal and banking fees to renew our authorization here, I don't know. That doesn't go down well with me. But if that's what it is, then we have to move forward with it. I will also note here, I sat in the last 2 days with the Public Policy Institute of California on their review of our California water situation. It's continuing tomorrow as well. And the head of the water department for Santa Cruz, who's also the interim manager for the city of Santa Cruz right now, was talking about how they have set up a line of credit of 50 million in order to deal with future events. Where, and her primary concern that she was addressing to everybody listening in was that when an event happens on a city, a municipality, a water district, that it takes years to recoup funds back from the government, and that the city of Santa Cruz wanted to be prepared for that inevitability in a major quake having gone through Loma Prieta many years ago in '89. So yes, I support the recommendation, but I would also offer up just a little personal guidance to the finance staff. And I'm not an expert here. Mr. Wunderlich is. But if there's an opportunity to expand that line of credit at minimal cost to the district, I would support that. And again, thank you, Director Gunther, for at least appreciating the fact that I initiated this for the district. Thank you.
Yeah, in regards to that, you know, your comments, I kind of was going along the same thoughts. And, you know, I'm wondering, it's great, 50 million credit, and, you know, certainly where we are with the 10, my concern would be is, you know, the higher we go up on that, and I agree with you, if we could go up higher with minimal cost, sure. But, you know, I wonder if 50 million, maybe you're better off spending some of that money on making that you're going to be spending on the line of credit, spending it now to maybe like improve the system like we're doing. So I would support your position on where we are. I also have this concern that, you know, it seems that we're putting money to something that could help us, which I'm all for, but sometimes you wonder, should I spend that money on something that I know will help to improve the infrastructure? I don't know. That's where I'm going with that. But yeah, I'll support you.
remember, this line of credit is really there for a major emergency for the district. So we are able to act quickly and access funds immediately when we need to deal with a serious situation. And I believe Mr. Wunderlich may want to comment on this if he's here in the meeting, or Mr. Stevenson, but I believe we actually have the ability to go up to 50 or 60 million in total borrowing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can respond to that. The 10 million is really a foot in the door. And the advantage of having the established line of credit is that if we do have a major emergency, and if we do, we know 10 million is a drop in the bucket if there's a major quake on the Hayward Fault, right? So by having our foot in the door, we can move very quickly with JP Morgan to expand the line of credit to the amount we would need to deal with that emergency. And so there's really not a need to pay more to maintain a higher line of credit, because should the emergency happen, we can work very quickly to increase the line of credit.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Wong, did you have any comment?
No comment. I just want to jump on what Director Gunther said, is that thank you, Director Seppi, for coming up with this line of credit idea. I definitely really appreciate that and your expertise in this. I do agree it's good for us to have this line of credit, and I will definitely be supporting this item. Thank you.
All right, and if I could dovetail into Director Sethi's comments about process. We are one of the few districts that have done the line of credit. I had suggested it many years ago with JPIA. We had some meetings in Livermore on this with different representatives, including the JPIA consultants. And for whatever reason, it didn't go forward. But the fact that the city of Santa Cruz, who has Walt Wadlow for a long period of time now on their advisory committee, is going forward is an interesting indication. We'll have to talk to Walt and find out if they had any influence on that. I'm a bit surprised at the legal fees entailed, because this is a common business practice in the real world with investor-owned, and particularly with investor-owned utilities. So we'd have to, I encourage our staff to continue to be involved and try to see how we might be able to standardize this practice and even expand the number of financial institutions that we could ask for the line of credit. We got Chase involved when we went out for a new financial services contract. And that was part of the initial contract, and they bumped it up every year. But it doesn't have to be tied to that provider. So I encourage us to keep administratively looking for ways to reduce the cost, and particularly perplexed by the $15,000 in additional legal fees. That seems, given the nature of the type of contract, to be significant. So thank you. I support the idea of continuing the line of credit, and hopefully we become the industry standard.
Yeah, so if I could just explain a couple of things. First, on the legal fees, what happens is we have the kind of the maintenance fee that we pay if we don't borrow any money. And then there's an industry benchmark that's used to calculate the rate we pay if we do borrow money. And the current industry benchmark that's used is known as the London Interbank Offer Rate, commonly referred to as LIBOR. That is no longer going to be published starting next year. And so the financial industry is transitioning to a new benchmark rate called the Secured Overnight Financing Rate that's published by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And so it's really that transition that on a one-time basis is increasing the legal fees, because much of the agreement has to be rewritten. You may recall with the initial line of credit, we actually spent $20,000 on legal fees for the initial development of the agreement. And just given how much has to be rewritten, it's a little more significant on a one-time basis this year. And then on the other point, in terms of the maintenance cost of the line of credit, initially JP Morgan offered rates that were at a loss to them, because they wanted to get our business, not just for this, but also for the general banking services. And so I can tell you that even what we're paying now for the maintenance fee is competitive with what other banks proposed in a competitive solicitation about 4.5 years ago when we did this RFP process. So it does continue to be a competitive rate. We did review with our financial advisor, and really in reviewing, with him, the only way where we could feel any confidence that we could get a lower rate is if the line were secured by a pledge of our water revenues. So right now it's completely unsecured. There's no pledge of our water revenues toward it. And so, staff would not recommend that we pledge our water revenues to this because it would have a lot of other effects on our coverage and ratings and credit ratings and other things. And so, this is certainly, we appreciate there's increase, but we do, based on what we're aware of that's out there in the market, this does continue to be a competitive price.
Okay, well, the thought comes to mind that we could pledge reserves. If we were about 3 times over deposited on our rate stabilization reserve, that would easily cover the 10 million, and possibly give us a lower rate. I would hope that, again, the legal fees, when I spoke of those, the cost of using a Word for a document to insert the word SAFR in place of LIBOR, on the face of it, appears to be a legal issue, but I am not doing the documents, and so let us proceed, and we'll have time each year to try and improve our what we have. Thank you.
Mr. Wunderlich, I have a question quickly. So as I understand it, the renewal for this year totals up between the $15,000 legal fee and maintenance fee to $72,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and is there a reason why we are not renewing for multiple years in a row instead of just for 1 year?
That's not something, I guess, that we've looked at in the past. If we wanted to do a multi-year renewal, I think if we wanted to do a multi-year, we could expect the annual maintenance fee to go up because JP Morgan would want to protect themselves against market changes in that second or third year. But it's certainly, I think, something we could look at in the future and then make a decision about, a longer term renewal versus, kind of regular annual renewals.
Well, I would be interested in a multi-year renewal, maybe 5 years out, because these are contingency funds for an emergency. And the second thing is I would be interested in what the renewal fee might be moving forward, if you have any insight to that.
I don't know that it will get less, if that's what you're asking, because there are, in addition to the cost of maintaining the credit, there are other administrative costs that go along with this within the bank that they're trying to recover. And for several years, they did it at a loss, and we're at a point where I think they're not willing to continue to do this at a loss. And so, but that's definitely, I think in the future, we can bring back a multi-year versus a one-time renewal, and maybe with a multi-year renewal, because you're only paying the legal fees once, maybe it still pencils out.
Yeah, well, I don't want to see anybody lose money on doing business with us. So as long as it's reasonable, let's see what we can do.
Yeah.
But I think a multi-year agreement rather than year to year, I'm just expressing my own personal opinion, but I think that would be in the best interest of the district.
Well, thank you.
I'll make the motion to approve the staff recommendation on item 5.6 while I'm at it.
I'll second.
Then moved and second. Any additional comment on the motion? If not, roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Item 5.7, a review of the circumstances and potential ordinance declaring a water shortage emergency and adopting water use regulations, restrictions, and guidelines for the water shortage emergency and set a date for a public hearing. Staff, please.
Yes, and this item will be introduced by our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. As the board's aware, after 2 consecutive dry years, resulting in the second driest 2-year period in local recorded history, as well as severe drought conditions being experienced around the state, we are facing a likely 3rd dry year ahead. Staff have been busy evaluating conditions and preparing for what's to come in 2022. Tonight, we have Leonard Ash, Water Supply Supervisor, and Stephanie Nevins, Water Use Efficiency Supervisor, who are here to share the latest updates and preview for the board a draft of a potential ordinance declaring a water shortage emergency and adopting water use regulations, restrictions, and guidelines, which has been included in the board packet for reference. I do have a lot to cover tonight, but before I turn over the presentation, I would like to read into the record a comment that we did receive from the public tonight on this particular item. And the comment is, "Your Zoom choices do not allow use of my Safari browser. That is unfortunate. My reason for attending this meeting was to suggest that calling for greater conservation efforts from those who have been compliant with past requests is the same as group punishment for all when only a few are outliers. You have records of water usage for all of your accounts. Use that data to achieve greater conservation goals first. BR." And that's the conclusion of the comment that we received. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Ash to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Heides. And as she mentioned, I'll be joined tonight by Ms. Nevins, our Water Use Efficiency Supervisor. Next slide, please. Now, for an overview of this presentation, I'll be providing the water supply outlook and planning efforts for 2022, as well as an update on our customer demand response. And then Ms. Nevins will review the ongoing public outreach and water use efficiency activities, a preview of the draft ordinance, present the financial implications related to that decision, and outline the next steps that will follow. And if the board so chooses to set a date for the public hearing. Next slide, please. Now, since last month's drought update to the board, the California governor on October 19th issued a proclamation which expanded the drought emergency statewide. In the process, the governor urged Californians to redouble their efforts to conserve to meet the requested 15% reduction target established this summer. Moreover, the governor asked water agencies to make use of their water shortage contingency plans that were just updated concurrent with our 2020 to 2025 urban water management plans to evaluate response to the drought. The US Drought Monitor map shown here was released on November 4th, and they've since issued a revised map on November 11th that has only modest improvements in the northernmost part of the state from what you see here. But still, the vast majority of the state remains within either the orangish colored severe drought, the reddish extreme drought, or the darker red exceptional drought classifications. In short, the entire state remains in a drought. Next slide, please. As you know, the reason we're in a drought is that water years 2020 and 2021 were the second driest 2-year period on record for the state. And water year 2021 has the distinction of being the second driest year ever on record in the state. Looking at statewide reservoir conditions, the several reservoirs with very low blue bars showing the current storage levels reflect the results of these persistent dry conditions. And this graphic is from November 9th, and today Lake Oroville is 29% full, which is 58% of average for this time of year. The Department of Water Resources, or DWR, reported that Lake Oroville had 2 record lows this year. 2021 saw Oroville at its lowest low, and even at its high point in storage earlier in the year, it made the record books for being the lowest high point ever since they started operations there. The photo you see here are the water intakes for the Hyatt power plant at Oroville. DWR was forced to shut down those intakes temporarily because of these historic low conditions. And this is the first time they ever had to do that due to low water levels. So while that October atmospheric river did not break the drought by any stretch, it was a welcome event. Next slide, please. Now, the water supply outlook for 2022 includes greater uncertainty than earlier on in this drought. A main factor in that uncertainty is the emergency regulations adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board, or State Board, that provided the ability to curtail water rights holders in the Sacramento, San Joaquin Bay Delta watersheds. As we reviewed last month, when curtailments are in place, affected water rights holders would not be allowed to impound or divert new water supplies, but they could make use of water that's already in storage prior to the curtailment. These curtailments have applied to both of our imported water supplies, to DWR, who operates the State Water Project, and to San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, or SFPUC, that operates the regional water system. While the State Board has temporarily suspended those curtailments during the rain events we had in October and November, the possibility of the State Board reimposing those curtailments remains very much in question for the remainder of this water year. Due to very low storage in the State Water Project, the initial Table A allocation, which is those new water supplies that would be available to contractors in 2022, those initial Table A allocations may be very small, or possibly zero when DWR announces the initial allocation numbers expected next month. As you recall, DWR had a final Table A allocation of 5% for 2021, and 5% of our contract amount is about 2,100 acre feet. Nonetheless, even with a very low or zero initial Table A allocation, DWR has been working closely with the State Water Project contractors to prioritize the delivery of the contractor's supplies that are already held in storage. As we discussed last month, the State Board curtailment applies to the Tuolumne River and can affect our imported supplies from SFPUC. Now, in an effort to comply with the State Board processes of seeking an exemption from full curtailment to provide for public health and safety, the SFPUC staff plans to seek an emergency declaration from their commission, and now they are expected to do that on November 23rd. That action by the SFPUC would result in potential cutbacks to our purchase quantity from the SFPUC regional water system. Those cutbacks have the potential to be significant depending on how the drought persists. SFPUC staff has indicated they intend to request a voluntary 10% reduction system-wide using a fiscal year 1920 baseline. However, depending on continued conditions and the regional customer response, they may need to take more severe cutbacks, with initial figures that we've received indicating that the district's SFPUC imports may be limited to approximately 8,000 acre feet per year, which represents about 52% reduction over the amount of our individual supply guarantee in our contract. And that's if they decide to move to a mandatory cutback scenario. So in summary, we face real and potential constraints on our imported water supplies as they face uncertainties in their ability to rebuild their stored water supplies with new water this coming water year. Next slide, please. Now, this chart provides the latest update on how our customer demands are tracking with the governor's call for a 15% voluntary reduction in water use. As you know, the orange line shows 2020 demands, which serves the baseline from which the governor is asked to conserve 15%. The dashed purple line shows a general demand pattern we would expect to see if we were achieving a 15% reduction. Calendar year 2021 demands are shown in red through November 1st, and demands are decreasing, to be sure, thanks in part to the rain event of late October. We saw a significant drop in customer demands in October to bring us near that 15% reduction. And finally, the light gray line represents our 2015 demands, showing how our customers have been able to achieve even greater water use efficiency at the height of the last drought. Next slide, please. Now here's the seasonal precipitation outlook provided by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which indicates for the period of December of 2021 through February 2022, a period of time when we would expect to see significant precipitation and begin to gauge what type of water year we will have. The outlook for this period indicates the increased probability for below normal precipitation in the coming months. Again, we're in La Nina conditions, and there could be unexpected developments such as atmospheric river events. But the best available information we have shows it's prudent for planning purposes to expect this could be a third consecutive dry year. Next slide, please. So now wrapping all these previous slides together, we've come through 2 years of critically dry conditions. Statewide water storage is very low, and there is uncertainty for how our imported water suppliers could access new water to rebuild that storage. And forecasts point to a possible third dry year ahead. Now, taking a clear-headed look at our current condition, staff and analysts, staff analysis of the anticipated 2022 availability of water supplies determined that the district would not meet the current level of demand. Furthermore, that analysis shows that a 15% system-wide conservation would be sufficient to operate under multiple constraints, such as how these limited water supplies could be utilized to meet customer demands in 2022. The analysis has informed the development of a draft ordinance, which you will see tonight, declaring a water shortage emergency with water use restrictions to achieve 15% conservation. Ms. Nevins will be reviewing the draft ordinance in greater detail later in the presentation. But first, I'll turn the presentation over to Ms. Nevins to highlight recent efforts on public outreach. Next slide, please.
May the board ask a couple of questions here?
This is a good point to ask questions, would it not?
Yes, and there'll also be an opportunity for questions at the end as well.
Yeah, but before you make the transition here, I just have a simple question, which I brought up, I believe, in a couple of previous meetings. So I understand the possibility of SFPUC trying to encourage all of its users to decrease their water usage. But just as we did in the previous drought, what is the possibility or flexibility, that might be a better word, of taking advantage of additional SFPUC water during this, if we go into a third dry year? Even if we're willing to pay more money for it, would the water be available up to our contract commitment?
So under our contract, if they do declare a shortage condition, the PUC, in that case, it would depend on the magnitude of what they're requesting. So if they enter that voluntary phase, the contract provides for a certain allocation of water to its wholesale customers. And it depends on how we do as a region to meet that voluntary reduction that will determine how much additional water might be available for wholesale customers such as ACWD to go above that 10% requested voluntary reduction. When we do go into a cutback scenario, in that condition, it does provide for financial penalties for going above your cutback amount. So again, the amount of water that could be available to wholesale customers such as us to go above our cutback allocation will depend on overall how the other wholesale customers are meeting their obligations and whether there is additional water available for purchase at a higher price. But there are a lot of uncertainties in sort of how collectively the region will respond. So it's unclear for us to say there will or will not be extra water available when we need it. However, staff has been in close coordination with SFPUC to discuss our particular needs for additional water supplies. And so they are aware of that, and we're in discussions with them about how we can best meet our customers' needs this year.
Mr. Ash, I have one second and final question. Normally, once in a while, I attend a Bosca meeting, so I get the update on where Hetch Hetchy is in the system. But that was not on your slide of reservoirs here. What's going on with their system of reservoirs? Do you have a little bit of an update as to where the whole Hetch Hetchy system is right now?
I do have an update. It might not be the absolute latest and greatest, but the total system storage as of earlier this month, 72.6% of full capacity. And with the curtailments temporarily suspended, the PUC does have the ability to access their water bank, and that's additional water that they use in conjunction with irrigation districts off of Don Pedro. And so they do have access to that water bank as well. So they did see significant gains during the rainfall event in late October. And so relative to the other reservoir conditions that you saw on that slide, the Hetch Hetchy system is significantly better off than most of the other state reservoirs.
Okay, thank you very much for an excellent presentation, Mr. Ash.
All right, if I might, this is our second drought in the last 6 years. In the last drought, we became nervous and concerned that we were going to have to purchase surplus San Francisco water over and above our contractual minimums. In fact, did not San Francisco remove the contractual minimums? So we actually purchased less water, and we did not draw any additional San Francisco water in spite of a significant drought.
So yeah, a couple different questions in there. So the minimum purchase obligation that the district normally has under our contract to purchase a minimum quantity of water every year, that minimum purchase obligation was waived in the last drought. And in fact, it has been waived again this year because of drought conditions. And then I'm sorry, the second part of that question had to do with
that we did not require any additional San Francisco water. We actually purchased less water than our contractual minimum during the last drought.
That's correct. Yes, during the last drought. This time things are a little bit different. Partly, one is that if they do a water shortage declaration, that would trigger portions of the contract that they avoided having to trigger last time. As you recall, the SFPUC did not institute this sort of emergency declaration in the last drought. However, it was the state that stepped in to require 20% conservation or more. And so that it was that state action that sort of covered the reductions that the PUC was asking for last time. If they do take this step now, not only would our minimum purchase obligations continue to be waived during this drought period, but then it would institute certain cutback requirements under our contract that haven't been instituted before.
Well, and is it not also true that San Francisco has up to a 6-year supply of water to meet local needs in their nearby reservoir system?
I don't have the exact figures at hand, so I can't speak to that exact figure. I know that their design drought is a 7.5-year period, and so they do endeavor to have a significant source of water supply available. I know it is a multiple years of supply. However, if they do institute this action under our contract, we would be limited in what we could purchase or what they would be obligated to provide to their wholesale customers.
Limited, but they would have the water available depending on the circumstances. The next, has there not also been modifications to the master services agreement with San Francisco that allows for a sale of water among members of BOSCA, and that ACWD could be potentially be, if we had found additional water supplies, when we have several, sell water to other members of other BOSCA members at a significant increase in cost and over the price that we're paying for it.
So the contract does have a procedure for accounting for the allocations that each wholesale customer receives under a cutback scenario. And part of that accounting does allow for wholesale customers to sell water to other wholesale customers during the drought. Again, this has never been instituted before, so the exact mechanics of how it would work and sort of costs that would be attached to those transfers are still being explored. It's really a new territory for all the wholesale customers as well. But theoretically, yes, that if we had additional water supplies and could completely forego SFPUC supplies, we could sell that water to other wholesale customers under that sort of drought cutback scenario. However, I just want to point out that operationally, we need to make use of our SFPUC supplies for blending purposes. And in fact, access to SFPUC and supplies and their use allows us to blend with groundwater. So we do get basically a twofold benefit for every unit of SFPUC water that we can bring in. And given our blending constraints with PFAS, for example, our analysis shows that we really do need to make use of SFPUC purchases this year, and we won't be able to make that available for others in the current conditions and configurations that we have right now.
If I could just emphasize that point, thank you, Mr. Ash, that under that cutback scenario, which we expect is coming, we will need all of the SFPUC allocation that would be available to us under that cutback scenario to blend with groundwater at our blending facility. So we would not have excess SFPUC available under that cutback scenario.
But is it not also possible under these current changes that it doesn't have to be SFPUC water in the system? We're also looking at connecting our brackish desal plant to the Hetch Hetchy system, or if we could tie in state water or other local resources that we could sell that water at San Francisco rates to other customers of the San Francisco system. They do not have a water quality guarantee within their system to the BOSCA members.
I don't believe that what you're describing, putting other water into the regional water system would be a possible solution in this current drought. While we are exploring, for example, our purified water feasibility evaluation is exploring some options that we would either forego SFPUC supplies or potentially augment. We understand the PUC has very high water quality standards for any concepts that would introduce water into the regional water system.
The hardness is not among them. So that being the point, that I think we have some flexibility here, and we might actually have much like we did last time. We went out with the 12.4, we collected $12.4 million on a surcharge telling people we had to purchase additional San Francisco water, and we purchased none in the last drought. And then we never changed our story. So hopefully as we go into this, we will be more flexible in our public outreach and communication and tell people what's actually happening. And I would think that the number you used, 8 million, being 52% of our contractual capacity. In fact, that's that's a little slightly over our contractual minimum. So I would hope as we get into this more detail, we'll realize that we have significant more flexibility and may actually come out as a benefactor of the whole process. So thank you.
Well, and Director Reed, let me just clarify, because perhaps I didn't speak clearly, that we anticipate around 8,000 acre feet might be available to us in a cutback scenario that is being contemplated. And that volume is slightly less than our minimum purchase obligation.
Right. But it's in the same ballpark what we've historically used. So the worst case scenario now is our historic use. So it's not, I don't see the crisis, but we'll go ahead. We'll proceed. Well, thank you. Is there any other board comment on this item before we proceed on to the public outreach component?
I think we have the other portion of the presentation here.
Yes, exactly. That's the ongoing
Ms.
public
Nevins.
outreach component. Or the slide that's currently on the screen. So if there's no other additional, let's move on and continue the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Weed and Mr. Ash. So we have had a robust communications and public outreach program on the drought since early May. And I just would like to give a big kudos to the public affairs team because they have been working really hard and came up with some incredibly creative ideas for their campaign, One Saves Water. They're also trying out some new outreach. You may have heard about it in committee meetings or in the last board meeting, but we do have some statistics on the Google and Facebook ads. We have almost 90,000 reach and 525 click-throughs to our drought page. We sent out a postcard that was received in early November to every physical address in the service area. And we did several community drought update meetings. We have a drought resource center in our lobby now that it's open, and we're giving out yard signs, and we've given yard signs to the cities to place around in the parks. And then we've done a lot more than that previously. So I just wanted to give that update on what's going on with public outreach, and there's more planned as well. Next slide, please. We also have been working very hard to get our customers set up with participation in our rebate programs. We've answered a lot of phone calls, received a lot of water waste reports. We're still tracking well above our pre-drought numbers in all of these activities. It came down a little bit. It's not as high as it was in August, but it's leveled out for the fall. And so we still have a lot of interest. Next slide, please. We've expanded programs. A while ago, I think it was in June, we raised the rebate amount from $1 to $2 for the Water Efficient Landscape Rebate Program, which is the turf removal program. And we added leak services to our income qualified water savings assistance program. And I would like to express gratitude to the board for making those decisions to increase the rebate amount and expand those programs. That has really helped for conservation efforts this year. We expanded water conservation kit eligibility and device distribution. We're sending out kits to more customers and more, if somebody has 2 shower heads, they're gonna get 2 shower heads if that's what they need. Then we also hosted, we always do the fall and the spring series of landscape workshops, but this year we focused on drought topics. We've got some upcoming plans for conservation programs. We're looking to fast track our outdoor residential water use survey measure that was in the water efficiency master plan, but not scheduled until fiscal year 23-24. And that was in that plan because of the water conservation legislation. But we know they were going to be, that outdoor residential water use was going to be a big focus of that. So we're looking at getting that on track earlier. We're proposing to streamline, and actually it was on consent tonight, a streamlined water efficient landscape rebate measure by participating through the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. They have hired Droplet Technologies. It's a pretty slick electronic application system, which will save a considerable amount of staff time in processing rebate applications for this program. It's a very complex program, so this will really help us get these more applications processed. We anticipate a lot more coming through. If we do declare a water shortage emergency and adopt an ordinance, we experienced that last time in the last drought. We're also considering expanding our dedicated landscape meter water budget program, adding more landscape accounts into that program, and so they can get the information. And if we do adopt an ordinance, there would be a reduction in their budget to demonstrate how much water they should be using under the ordinance. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the ordinance, and we've been this past. You saw the demand curve. It's encouraging. We're seeing the fruits of our labor, which is nice, although there has been some rain that is partly to account for that. But we have developed this ordinance because we're looking at a need for a 15% reduction in water use. And so the ordinance has three main elements. It has a declaration of a water shortage emergency. It includes statements on statewide developments and dry year conditions or water supply impacts. It discusses the water shortage contingency plan process, and it discusses a public hearing before adoption of the water shortage emergency ordinance. The ordinance itself, the restrictions or limitations includes limits on non-essential uses and on water waste, minimizing water waste. There's an enforcement component, and there's a process for exceptions. There's also voluntary water use guidelines primarily focused on indoor water use. It is proposed to apply to all district water sources and all users in the service area, and it will be adopted, if it is adopted, pursuant to the district's authority to adopt an ordinance such as this under these water code sections. Next slide, please. About the ordinance, it's a 15% district-wide reduction by targeting certain uses. So it's not an account by account 15% reduction. And I think there's a lot of confusion with that in the public, but we just want to make sure that that's clear. It's been created to achieve that 15% reduction. We looked at water use, and we looked at what indoor and outdoor reductions we could get to get to that 15%. So no mandatory rationing. It focuses on irrigation, so that's peak summer month demand, shaving off that demand curve. We considered, and we did this last time in 2014, we wanted to protect health and safety, minimize impacts to the economy. We wanted to make it easy to implement and understandable by our customers. We want to be fair and not penalize efficient water users. We've heard them. There are lots of them that are contacting us all the time these days, telling us about everything that they're doing. We have a lot of customers who are really, really water conscious. So it also has exceptions, and we would approve an exception if there was a hardship or a health and safety concern. It would be a case-by-case basis. Next slide, please. So the focus is on minimizing waste and non-essential uses, minimizing landscape irrigation, but there's enough irrigation within the ordinance to maintain plants and trees and the long-term viability of turf. So it also encourages tree care, gardens that produce food, and water efficient gardens. So it's, again, not a 15% per account reduction. The mandatory restrictions are on certain uses that are non-essential, the frequency of landscape irrigation, and there's voluntary guidelines to improve indoor water use efficiency. We're going to support this with expanded conservation programs. If it's adopted, we would come to the board later with a request for additional program expansion. We intend to work very closely with public affairs to have regular and frequent communication outreach to the community. Next slide, please. This is the main component of the ordinance. It's the irrigation days per week. And you may remember from 2014 that this was also the main point of, or main part of that ordinance. It worked. These days per week were identified and achieved. If they're followed, they achieve a 15% reduction. Limited irrigation in the winter months, only every other week, and no irrigation unless if there's a prolonged dry period during those months. Next slide, please. The ordinance also references our existing water waste ordinance. So these are some of the water waste prohibitions in that ordinance that are incorporated into this water shortage emergency ordinance draft. There's additional limitations: washing of hard surface areas with direct hosing, except when there's a health and safety concern, cleaning structures unless there's a need to do it to prepare for repair or painting, and it must be done with a shutoff nozzle, draining and refilling of swimming pools, use of decorative fountains, and we're asking that leaks be fixed within 72 hours of discovery. There are a few new things in here from the 2014 ordinance. We learned some lessons from the last drought. Next slide, please. We have a progressive enforcement, again, very similar to 2014. We work with our customers first. We try to correct any violations. We send courtesy notices, we call them, we do site visits, and we're planning to continue to do that. We do that. We have this process already in place with the water waste ordinance that we have, where we really try and get the customer to recognize what they're doing and stop what they're doing first before we go into the official ordinance enforcement process. But then this draft has written notices similar to our existing process, and it can lead to termination of water service. We're adding flow restrictors in cases where termination of water service may not be feasible. We want to have it as a tool in our toolbox. So there's an exceptions and appeal process. If certain criteria is met, we would approve it. And it's case by case. We would receive a form or from a customer with information we're requesting and review it. There's fees for field visits, reconnection of service, and flow restrictors. The flow restrictors is a new fee. We're planning to take that to the board next month to add that to the rate and fee schedule. And I just want to mention that any violation of this ordinance would be considered a misdemeanor. And again, the goal is to work proactively with our customers. We want to help them achieve the water reduction that's needed. We don't want to throw them into the enforcement process. That we want to have them understand what's going on and correct it before we go there. And so again, I wanted to mention that that it's very similar to the ordinance in 2014. we improved things based on lessons learned, and a couple of things that I've already mentioned is the flow restrictors. We thought that would be a good thing to have as a tool for enforcement. And we also were put more into the ordinance to encourage tree care and water efficient landscapes. The number of days of irrigation is tweaked just slightly, and that was really to dial in that 15%. It's a 36% reduction in outdoor water use and irrigation use. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just touch on the financial implications of mandatory conservation at 15%. The projected loss if this ordinance was adopted and implemented would be about 11.6 million annually. And that's without any rate to address that impact. But then if we implemented stage rates, the stage rate to make us whole would be about 78.7 cents per unit of water per 100 cubic feet. Next slide, please. I discussed this earlier in under proposed expanded conservation programs. We may need additional funding to support ordinance enforcement. That would be temporary staff services and additional funding for for rebates and other programs that we would do to or run to get customers to conserve. And these are some estimates, and we would come to the board to get approval for all of this. Good news is that some expenditures can be recouped through California OES drought funding. We've already submitted for some of those expenses from April through October. Next slide, please. So the next steps is to set a public hearing date. This is per the water code. We cannot declare a water shortage emergency or adopt an ordinance until we've had a public hearing where our customers can have the opportunity to be heard and to protest against the declaration and present their needs and concerns. The public hearing requirements require us to post the time and date of the time, date, and place of the public hearing, and to do that at least 7 days in advance of the hearing in a local newspaper. We need to publish a summary or the full text of the ordinance at least 5 days in advance of a public hearing in the local paper, and also post a certified copy of the full text in the district office available for customers to review. Other next steps are to conduct outreach in advance of a public hearing, continue to monitor conditions to identify any changes, any additional state actions. We can update the draft ordinance and the declaration before and the declaration to adopt the water shortage regulations, restrictions, and guidelines for consideration at the December board meeting following the public hearing. And we will continue to provide monthly committee and board updates and continue to enhance public outreach and conservation programs. Next slide, please. So the recommendation tonight is to review, as we've done, ordinance declaring a water shortage emergency and adopting water use regulations, restrictions, and guidelines for the water shortage emergency, and by motion set December 9th, 2021 at 6 p.m. as the date and time for a public hearing to consider the adoption of the ordinance. And now we're ready for questions.
And thank you, Ms. Nevins. Just before we move to the question and answer, I just wanted to reemphasize a couple of quick things. We did talk about the various pressures on different supplies today and the 15% needed conservation. The behind the scenes details that we didn't talk about in detail today are simply that the staff does use a very robust model to look at our water supply optimization model in preparation for making this analysis of what level of supply and demand we will have. And in addition to the supply constraints that you heard about tonight, it also takes into account the variety of different operational constraints that we need to achieve in order to keep everybody going with water in the system. So I did want to highlight that too, because we are limited in some ways with these new constraints this year. There are differences from the last drought, in particular with San Francisco being that they may go to a mandatory restriction situation, and emergency declaration is quite a difference this time around. And that's part of why we're here today, to share this information and get it in front of the board for discussion and potential consideration of the ordinance. So with just those last few closing comments, we're happy to go ahead and answer questions on anything that you've heard tonight and the next steps.
This is Director Sethi. I have a few questions and comments.
Director Sethi, before you, let me see if there's any member of the public that wants to comment. There being none, please proceed.
Okay, so I'm not sure about tonight's agenda. I'm just looking at it. Is it clear that we have a rates hearing on December 9th at our board meeting too, in addition to what you're proposing here?
We do have a rates. It's not a public hearing. It's an item for the board to consider what would go in our Proposition 218 notice. So it'll be our final opportunity to consider rates in December. Yes.
And at that meeting, we will set the public meeting for January, February, right?
Correct, for February.
February, okay. So this is a separate public hearing that we're having on December 9th for consideration of this proposed ordinance.
Yes.
Okay, so number two, I'm looking forward to your presentation next month on the water restrictors that you're proposing to add a fee for. I just hope it's not too punitive toward residents or businesses, but I'll hold off until we have that presentation next month.
I have a public comment from Ken N. Could you let him speak and then bring it back to the board?
Sure.
Yes, so we'll open it up to the public. Mr. Ken N.
Thank you. Sorry, a little bit slow in raising my hand before you closed the call for public comments. So my comment has to do with the considerations that were explained on slide 14, specifically fairness, right? So don't penalize efficient water users. Yet on slide 19, I believe, you're talking about the financial impact and implementation of a stage rate would impact everybody, including those who have already conserved. So I see a little bit of a conflict there. And I know that this board, some members of this board have opined about, a zero tier rate and in their discussions about, service fixed charges versus consumption charges. So I wonder, or I'm asking the board to consider if it's necessary to go to this stage rate and declare a drought emergency in the spirit of not penalizing those people who have already called for conservation and have made the behavior changes that you're looking for, and therefore are what you call efficient water users, that the impact of the drought actions do not financially penalize them for having done the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sethi, do you wish to proceed?
Yes. To address Mr. Ken N, I'll leave it up to you to contact Mr. Wunderlich, but I believe that we presented in our stage rates that it would be of minimal effect to the lowest water users. So if you were using above the average, let's say, I don't know, 12 to 16 units per billing period, then the stage rates go up quite a bit. But below that, it's not of much consequence to the ratepayer. So let me continue here. I appreciated the staff in the new aqueduct highlighting the need to take care of our trees, which we did not do in our previous drought messaging in the drought a few years back. And throughout the Tri-City area, we lost thousands and thousands of trees. And I will admit this summer I had to contact the water district and notify them that I was going to be running my water quite a bit for a month or two because my redwood trees were appearing to die, and I still may have to spend a few $1,000s to take down a couple of redwood trees, and I'm really sorry about that personally because the drought has been going on for too long, and I have quite a few redwood trees on my property, and they're suffering quite a bit. So my I just received I think my water bill was up to $300 a month. In the summer, my latest bill is down to 120, half of which is the fixed charge. So I'm feeling like I'm doing better off right now. Under this discussion, I would like to bring up something which I have profiled in one of our committee meetings and with Mr. Stevenson. And 2 weeks ago, we had 2 community meetings in which I participated in both on looking at the drought forecast and community or district response for the community. And in each of those meetings, I brought up my concern, which has been a pet peeve for over a dozen years, which is the fact that our ratepayers who decide to conserve and do turf replacements and take advantage of our other rebate programs have to file a IRS Form 9 where the rebates that they receive from the district are incurred and taxed at the income tax rate for a customer. Governor Brown many years ago got rid of this for the state of California, as I understand it, and so we don't have that taxation of water conservation rebates in California anymore. But at the federal level, we do. And that is very discouraging for people that want to do turf replacements. And so I have been in contact over the last few years with Senator Feinstein's office, and before that Barbara Boxer, and now our current U.S. Senator, and other legislators, and I keep bringing it up at Aqua conferences, that we got to get rid of this federal taxation of water conservation rebates. And so Dianne Feinstein and our fellow U.S. Senator and a couple of House of Representative members did finally introduce in July a bill to to exempt these water conservation rebates. And that's why I was bringing it up 2 weeks ago in front of our community meetings, because I really want to see this get passed through. In discussion with Mr. Stevenson, I decided on my own initiative to go forward to Aqua with Cindy Tuck, who works on legislative issues, and Dave Egerton, and ask that they promote this to our federal lobbyist in Aqua, Dave Reynolds. And so he took on the initiative back in Washington, D.C. with his staff. And then I promoted this up through CSDA. And Mr. Stevenson, I'll forward you the messages that I got back from all these folks, because they aggressively went forward and tried to support my interests here. And I don't want to pat myself on the back, but apparently I'm the only person in Aqua or CSDA that has been pushing this issue so hard. And so the National Association of Special Districts, which CSDA participates in, really aggressively has been working on this. And got some nice messages back today from Colleen Haley, who represents our Bay Area district. And the language is now inserted into the Build Back Better Act. I think it still needs some clarification, which I'm going to offer tomorrow. But I think we're on the verge of seeing the repeal of the taxation on water conservation rebates finally at the federal level. And so I just wanted to highlight that for everyone here, because you hear me bringing it up from time to time, but we may be within a couple of weeks of seeing this repealed. And so I was thinking today along the lines of Shakespeare, and I will tease you here. Is it to BBB or BBB? Hopefully we will see a good outcome here.
Okay. Paul, if you can.
I didn't get very many laughs there on the to be or not to be.
All right. We have another public comment coming up. Let me make a quick comment, though, on the legislation, the W-9s on tax deductibility or taxability of water conservation. This has been I'm on the Federal Affairs Committee. This has been an issue for many decades, for a long period of time. The problem is that Jared Huffman authored the legislation, and the Republicans had such a personal animosity to Mr. Huffman and his past experiences with the Environmental Defense Fund that they refused to promote any legislation that he was the primary signatory for. Now that they've had the last elections and the Democrats have once again taken control of the House of Representatives, there's a much better chance that this will go through. There was always support for it within Congress, but we could not get the leadership of Congress, which was then anti-Huffman, even more so than Republican, to proceed and process the legislation. So I suspect strongly that it will go through now. But Mr. Kinnan, you have a comment?
Yes, specifically with this topic, I was also present at the community meeting where Director Sethi brought this up, and I do agree with Director Sethi on this point that, you know, as a customer that may want to take part in this rebate, having to deal with the taxability of a rebate would be annoying. And I do, you know, applaud the efforts to work through the legislative process to get this removed. However, the legislative process is never certain and can be slow and fraught with amendments and last minute changes. And as I brought up at the community meeting, I am aware of two potential quote unquote workarounds that the district may want to consider. The first is if the district were to provide the landscaping at below market prices as part of the program, as the program requires replacement of the turf with a specified number of plants, approved plants. One way the district could affect the rebate would be to provide the landscape at a price to the homeowner that would effectively build in the rebate. And since that is not a rebate in the sense of, it's a rebate, but it's non-taxable because it's a rebate on something that is actually purchased. Because as we all know, if you get a rebate when you purchase a car, that rebate is not taxable because the IRS views that as a discount on the selling price, and discounts are not taxable. The second option is in line with IRS Revenue Ruling 91-36. A rate reduction or a non-refundable credit is not taxable to the customer. So if the rebate were given to the customer as a rate reduction or a non-refundable tax credit on their bill, as opposed to a check, according to IRS Revenue Ruling 91-36, such rate reduction or non-refundable credit should not be taxable to the owner. So I bring that second point up because I understand that the district is going through the process of setting rates and associated charges. And if the district were to explore this method of affecting the rebate in a non-taxable way to the customer, it may be a convenient time to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent suggestion, particularly the second methodology appears to be something we should give strong consideration to. Is there other response to the public comments at this time? Is there any other board input at this time?
I'd like to add on to that, I really truly hope that the legislation will pass through. My fear is that they're going to put it with something that may not pass through, and we'll just be left where we are. Hopefully there's some ideas out there where we could kind of circumvent what the taxing of the rebate. So I don't know. I know I can understand the politics, sadly understand the politics, and perhaps maybe working, there aren't many Republicans in the state of California to work with, but if we can convince them that, hey, this is affecting their customer. I know with the salt issue, there was a lot of pushback from the far left that it was helping the rich. I could see the same argument being made here with turf removal, but hopefully that won't be the case. But we'll see. I fully support Director Sethi's efforts. I'm afraid we're going to have to keep going, though. I just don't see it making it at the federal level yet.
Maybe I'll just chime in really quickly to let the board know and the public know that, since that committee discussion, we have been working with folks, including folks in the legislature, representatives, and what we're hearing is that the IRS may deal with this through guidance, through revised guidance outside of the legislative process. There is the bill that Director Sethi pointed out from Senator Feinstein that's out there, but it looks like there may be some change through IRS guidance that may beat the legislative process. So that's something we're still following. I certainly wouldn't suggest that we, reduce our rebate program or anything along those lines. There may be tweaks that we can make to our program in the way that Mr. Ken N suggests, but right now we are following a potential change to IRS guidelines that will help deal with this, hopefully.
Thank you. Other comments from members of the board?
Yes, if I may. First of all, if I would encourage staff to look into alternatives if the federal level does not come through in one way or another, we should explore ways locally that we could help our customers out. And back to the drought ordinance, I'm actually really glad to see that we are targeting wasteful use and outdoor and non-essential water use, and that fairness is considered. I am in the bucket of people who kept up with water conservation practices and did a permanent change, right? My lawn is dead, right now it's green just because it rained. And I've been using buckets to hand water my plants and my vegetables. It is inherently unfair to punish people when they have stepped up and conserved water and made that difficult behavior change. They participated in our rebate program to swap our lawn. There is just something really wrong to say, oh, great job, you change into a drought tolerant garden, and hey, by the way, here's the punishment. And this also go into the disconnect that I see between this ordinance and stage rate. This is not the time to talk about stage rate, and we could have this discussion when stage rate is up for discussion. But yes, the dollar amount is very minimal when you don't meet the 15% conservation target that we were looking at within the stage rate. We're talking about a few dollars for our efficient water users. But for me, in this case, it's not the dollar amount, it's the principle of it, right? The fact that I signed up to conserve water, yet now I have to pay more. That doesn't sit right with me. But as I said, I do apologize. This is not the right time for it, but I really like this route. Ordinance as proposed by staff, I think is actually really well done. And I look forward to next month's public hearing. Thank you.
I'd like to comment quickly. I kind of, if I remember correctly, and I know we're going to talk about rates, the rates next month, but if I remember correctly, the last time we went with stage rates, we did look very closely at trying to ensure that the true savers, and we are getting a tremendous amount of comments of people, you know, hey, this is everything I'm doing. What more can I do? And I agree. You're the reason, those ratepayers are why we are where we are today. Well, actually we hit 15 close after the rains, but it's good that we message to them that yes, one of the reasons we are where we are today is because of all your efforts, and we just need to get everybody else to make those efforts. But I also remember when we were talking about stage rates last time, if we were very careful as to ensure we didn't punish the ones that have helped that. I agree with Director Sethi there. I'm 99% certain we had done that. But anyway, that's another night.
All right, thank you. I might make a few comments. When we went through this last time, and again, I keep repeating, we had a drought a few years back, and we had a similar type of ordinance. But my understanding is we had 100% compliance. We did not have to do any enforcement action at all. Is that correct?
Ms. Nevins is the best. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we did have to issue a handful, less than 10 first notices.
Right.
Under the ordinance enforcement process, and that was enough. We never had to go to a second notice. We never had to terminate anybody's water service.
Okay. Let me suggest that then that the word enforcement be replaced with the word compliance in your presentation and documentation, because we're seeking a compliance, and our experience has been once we bring it to someone's attention, we have 100% positive response. Not that you can't still have enforcement in that measure, but the reality based on that experience, we know it's not a major, hopefully it's not a major problem. Second, there's been no comment about the $34 million, as I recall, in our rate stabilization reserve. We have an $11 million anticipated shortfall, but we have money in the bank in a designated reserve for this purpose of more than 3 times what has been suggested is going to be our impact in the first year. So the need to put in a supplemental budget rate increase, I question. I would ask that we give consideration to drawing down our rate stabilization reserve before we implement a rate increase. And that rate increase, rate stabilization reserve is about 3 times the benchmark. The benchmark is close to what we have now for what our reserves should be, but we have excess funds in it by measure of the benchmarks that we have for that reserve. On flow restrictors, I'd ask that you look at the new product coming out next month by Badger, which is a meter which has, with their AMI capabilities, also has the ability of remote flow restriction in 2 levels. It doesn't allow a full cutoff, but allows you 2 levels of remote cutoff, so that the need to have a special field trip to operate and turn on and off the flow restrictors is eliminated. And that can be done, it's an additional $50 per meter. And would be a way to address it. So thank you. It appears that our request this evening is to review the ordinance and set a date of December 9th for a public hearing to consider the adoption of an ordinance.
Director Weed, can I have a question for staff? Actually, your comment reminded me a question.
Please.
So staff clarification. Does the stage rate have to go with the declaration of a drought water shortage emergency? Or can we declare water shortage emergency so we could minimize outdoor use and wasteful water use and not initiate the stage rate?
Yes, so those are 2 different actions.
Okay.
You must have a declared water shortage emergency in order to implement a stage rate, but you are not required to implement a stage rate because there's declared water shortage emergency.
Okay, perfect. Then we could have that discussion that Director Wee just brought up of potentially using our emergency funds to cover the shortfalls at that time. So we'll have a separate action, separate discussion to decide if we even want to trigger the stage rate and discuss the financial. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And we could even include the stage rates in a Prop 218 notice, so they're on the books if we want to use them, and then also not implement them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the clarification.
I mean, encourage us to consider the latter, because the rate stabilization reserve is not an emergency reserve. It's a reserve that's in place if we have to, if we have a shortfall and we have a drought and people automatically, based on social media, not necessarily our own actions, reduce their water supply, the water sales, our water sales.
Yeah, and so I think this is probably something for more discussion at next month's board meeting. But I think the issue of whether to trigger a stage rate is you want to pay for the cost of the lost revenue from the conservation while it's occurring during the drought? Or do you want that lost revenue and that reduction in your reserves to be something that's made up after the drought?
Well, if it's in a reserve, we can draw it at any time, and we can draw it during the reserve. We can draw down the reserve at any time.
No, absolutely. But then as the reserves are drawn down, because our model assumes that over the next several years, all of our available reserves are drawn down, then at some point you have to replenish that if you go below the target line.
Or we get in a rational rate structure which matches variable cost to variable income and fixed cost to fixed income.
My
I-
recommendation is we come back to the ordinance and save this discussion for when we have an agenda item.
That's fine. All right, thank you.
This is Director Sethi.
Well stated.
This is Director Sethi. I would like to put it on the table to support the staff recommendation to set December 9th as the date and time for a public hearing to consider the adoption of this ordinance for a water shortage emergency.
I will second Director Sethi on that.
Do we have any more discussion on the motion? There being none, roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Kwong,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Okay, well, this is taking us longer than I might have thought. We're into 5.8. Can we go through this before we take a break?
Staff is certainly ready to.
All right. Then let us see the approval for director to attend meetings of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Power Authority Board and consideration of formation of an advisory committee to review the district's policies for compensation and expense reimbursement for members. These probably two separate items. And so let us first of all discuss the first and see if there's any opposition to including on the list of approved meetings the JPA for Los Vaqueros.
Sure. So let me just step through the summary here. And so Director Sethi has been designated by this board to represent the district on the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority Board of Directors. The district's policy for compensation for board members and the policy for expense reimbursement of board members lists meetings for which board member attendance is considered service rendered at the request of the board. The Los Vaqueros JPA board meetings are not on these lists. In order for Director Sethi to be compensated in accordance with district practice, the board may separately authorize his attendance. In addition, staff recommends that the board form an advisory committee to review the current board compensation and expense reimbursement policies and propose updates for review by the board. And so from staff's perspective, there are other reasons to open the compensation policy and the expense reimbursement policy for amendments and clarifications, in addition to specifically adding that Los Vaqueros Reservoir JPA meeting and committee meetings to the list of meetings in those policies. So staff's suggestion is to review amendments to these policies through an advisory committee of the board and bring back recommendations for the full board to consider and discuss. So recommendation is by motion. Number one, approve Director Sethi's participation in meetings of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority Board and board committee meetings. And two, consider the formation of an advisory committee comprised of 2 members of the board to consider, together with the general manager and general counsel, changes to the board's policy for compensation for board members and the policy for expense reimbursement for board members, including the addition of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Powers Authority to the list of meetings considered as service rendered at the request of the board for consideration at a future board meeting. So I'd be happy to address any questions.
All right, do we have any comments first from the public? See none from any member of the board?
Yes, from Director Sethi, if I may. So first of all, the very first meeting of the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Power Authority was held last Wednesday. I participated in that meeting representing ACWD along with Mr. Wunderlich as my backup. And so we went through the procedures of setting up that brand new board. It's quite an auspicious moment. I went through this with the Delta Conveyance Finance Authority with Bob, former General Manager Bob Shaver attending. And it's, like I said, a little bit auspicious when you recognize that you are establishing a brand new board for the first time and setting up everything administratively. We were successful in getting everything done in about an hour and a half last week, and we're looking forward to our second meeting next month. I believe that President Akbari authorized me to attend that meeting as a compensable meeting under his authority, but it wasn't necessary because I had another meeting that day too for the district. Second, I have long believed that we need a review of our compensation and expense reimbursement policies for the board. And in thinking about this ahead of tonight's meeting, I would like to recommend, if it's acceptable, that the two senior board members, Director Gunther and Director Weed, participate in that advisory committee along with the staff, because Director Wong and myself are maybe in the position of being in an election year where I think we want to steer clear of these kind of issues that come up and have it more neutral in terms of how these issues are being considered. And so I would just put that forward to Director Gunther and Director Weed if they are willing to serve in this capacity.
I'm willing. I think I served on the last one, and if I remember correctly, it was with Director Wade. And I do feel it's necessary for us to review the policy primarily based on this item. I fully support, the first part and compensation for going to for representing us at this power authority. And I'm actually surprised that we had to get the board president, and we really need to review our policy to ensure that we don't have to do that. That shouldn't be part of the process. And so I have no problem serving on that committee. I think that's the way to handle this, because there are lots of little things, and there definitely needs something to be reviewed, because we shouldn't have had to go to the president for your last compensation, nor should there even be a comment. There should be a question here. So I support both and would serve on the committee if asked.
Thank you. Other comments from board members?
I'll definitely support both. I do agree with Director Gunther that I think the policy needs to be changed for any position where a director is appointed by the board as a whole to represent the district. They really should be compensated for those meetings. It just doesn't make sense that we need to do a case-by-case approval. So in that sense, yes, the policy should be reviewed. I have no problem, and I would love it if Director Wee and Director Gunther would volunteer.
All right. All right, I have no problem with this in the sense my hope was we could do in our regular committee structure, but a special meeting to do this, clearing up the language so that we talk about in general purposes, that if we're representing a JPA, members of a JPA, we don't have to go through and list every JPA that's out there. It should be a category that's easily identified, and it will shorten the ordinance and reduce the number of specific line items we need in this document. So fine with that. Does that require a motion of the board? Oh, first, certainly that requires a motion to approve Director Sethi's attendance at Los Vaqueros, because we may not come up to an issue. And then we will establish under board direction a special committee. That doesn't require a special action of the board.
This is Director Sethi. If I may just insert here real quickly, there was a very good article yesterday in the San Jose Mercury News, East Bay Times by Paul Rogers, very extensively written on the new Los Vaqueros Reservoir Joint Power Authority. I highly recommend, and I'll pass it on to Mr. Stevenson so he can distribute it out to staff and the board. But it was very well researched. I could tell that Mr. Rogers took some considerable time between the meeting, actually from early last week through the meeting, through the weekend, to do all his proper research. So it was very well done, and this is getting statewide attention across the water industry, what happened last week. So I was very pleased to be able to represent our district, our board members, fellow board members. It's an exciting liftoff to a great project, regional project here for the Bay Area.
All right.
If I could chime in on Director Weed's question. Somebody can make the motion that includes both items, but with Directors Weed and Gunther serving on the advisory committee that would be formed by the action.
All right.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Miyake. I will make the motion to approve the staff recommendation as explicitly stated right here, with the recommendation that we approve Director Gunther and Director Weed for the advisory board.
And I'll say,
All right, thank you. We have a second. Without public comment, roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Kwong,
aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Hi. All right, we've been at this for a while, 2.5 hours. Is there anyone who requests a break at this point, or do you wish to go through with the now that we've ended the action calendar, we go on to reports and director's comments?
I would like to request a break, please.
All right, will 10 minutes work?
Yes.
Okay, we will reconvene then at approximately 25 minutes to 9 o'clock, 8:35. The items, okay, we're now being recorded, so we will proceed with item 6, reports. Take this to the staff. Is there any comment by any board member related to an item that is in the board committee reports?
This is Director Sethi. I do have one.
All right, which one?
Let me get to my notes here. Hang on. Okay, I would like to highlight one area of interest from 6.1.2, the LICA committee. It's an issue that I brought up in the most recent meeting with Director Gunther. And it's an issue that I've been working on and trying to help advance with our local assembly member, Alex Lee, representing half of Fremont and all of Newark. He authored a bill. I'm very proud of him on this as a new assembly member, to restrict mobile home water service charges from being overcharged by the property owners. And it was approved by the legislature in the Assembly and Senate and signed by the governor just recently. And so I wanted to highlight this not only for our board and staff, but for the general community, because I think we need to get the word out here. And I expressed in the committee meeting that I thought it was incumbent upon the district to inform the property owners of our various mobile home parks, which I believe we have about a dozen in the Tri-City area, to notify them that they are no longer allowed under this bill, which goes into effect January 1, to charge their residents of the mobile home park more than the utility or our water district is charging the property owner. And this has been an abuse that has been going on throughout California. And finally, Assemblyman Alex Lee took it upon himself to address this issue. And I'm a little fearful now that I've been able to investigate this more, that there are other property owners of multi-dwelling units across our Tri-City area that are doing the same thing. It's not only in the mobile home parks. I think I had an understanding with Mr. Stevenson, he might want to clarify this for all of us here, that at least we notify the property owners of the passage of this bill and its consequences. And if we could go a step further, I requested that we really try to send a letter out to the residents of these mobile home parks as best we can determine who they are from, you know, our database and everything. But I really wanted to highlight this, and as Assemblyman Lee has noted in his own remarks and other supporters, we have many people that are low income, senior citizens that live in these mobile home parks, and so deserve the best treatment that we can offer.
Yeah, and Director Sethi, I'll just round out that we are working on a letter right now that would go to the account holders for the mobile home parks. We've identified which customers those are, and so we'll be sending them a letter just to make sure that they're aware of that new legislation, and that this obligates them to meet these new requirements. So that is that process is underway right now.
What about, excuse me, what about doing a target mailing out to the actual residents so they're aware of what the obligations are of their own, you know, property management company or whatever?
Well, certainly we would do what the board desires us to do. Our thought was the obligation is on the property owner. Those are our actual customers, whereas the residents within the mobile homes are not our actual customers, they're sort of indirect customers. And we'd start with the property owners or the account holders. So that's what we're working on now. If the board would like us to take a further step, that's something that we could perhaps bring back to the board for discussion.
Could I throw out a suggestion to the rest of the board if they're willing to support me on this? I was thinking about writing a personal piece representing the board and the district for the Tri-City Voice to alert people to this new legislation.
Okay. Well, fine. We do have an advertisement in the Tri-City Voice, where we could include that in the district publication, but a supplemental letter I wouldn't have no objection to.
So I think if the board's going to give some direction like this, it should be something that's on the agenda. And certainly can do that, but I wouldn't have the board authorize an action without it being on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Other comments from the other board members on this item?
I wouldn't mind seeing it maybe move the agenda. I agree with Director Sethi. I'm not sure how much movement. I agree with the staff approach going to the owners, but there might be some avenues. I don't know if they have associations or board of directors and things like that of residents that live there. And that might be one way we could get there, but that would be a future item. And I would support looking at this in the future.
Okay,
Maybe the staff could write something up that goes into the newspaper.
that would be,
Periodically, they have a column that goes into the newspaper.
we have a paid advertisement in the paper each week. Let me, on the broader picture that was raised by both Director Sething and Director Gunther, I would note that the vast majority of new customers are in multi-tenant environments, these large apartment complexes, 1,600 going in at New Park Mall, 1,000 at Toll Brothers at Warm Springs. The ability, and we have requirements for sub-metering, but we do not really have any administrative structure, nor do we have a billing relationship with those sub-meters. That we need to give some thought, if we're going to do a water conservation program, how we're going to recognize the technology that's going in, potentially allow some AMI database, and work with the property owners and being able to identify how their water is being used in some very large complexes. And then eventually do the retrofit of the existing complexes. But we're currently, with our current AMI program, I would suggest that 90% of the new meters are not covered. And that's where our growth is. And and also a large percentage of our water users are not, so the 86,000, given the multi-tenant urbanization of the development and urbanization of our community, is something we don't have a good handle on.
Mr. Stevenson, may I make this suggestion rather than me authoring something for the Tri-City Voice? How about if I submit information to the district periodically? Shireen Gonzalez, Ms. Gonzalez, puts something out in a column in the newspaper, and maybe we can take all this information, frame it around that, and she's informing the community on behalf of the district. Would that go? So we don't have to agendize this?
That's not a problem. You can send me whatever you have. And certainly we routinely review with the LICA committee all of our communications with the local newspapers, and we could certainly do that here too. And so I think that's fine.
All right, let's proceed in that direction then. Those are the only comments I have under board committee reports.
Are there other comments from the board on board committee reports? All right, then let us move then to 6.2 operational reports.
I have some questions here, but I would like to have these questions answered by the general manager offline, because there's multiple questions here and I don't want to take up board time. It's under 6.2.7, the quarterly personnel report. And I just want to have a better understanding of what's going on inside the district.
No problem.
And I feel like we can do that just one-on-one.
All right, thank you.
I do see a hand by a member of the public, Mr. Ken N.
Oh, all right, please, Mr. N.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment on, I believe it would be 6.2.1, 6.2.2, and 6.2.8. So I'm just looking at your rainfall report. I can see the impact of that storm of the century, I think is what it's been called. And it actually has, at least for a short period of time, it has put us above the wettest year. And I can see the impact of that in your water production reports. And as has become quite routine, I would like to again congratulate the district on its efforts to reduce the water hardness. I think looking at the map, there's only one monitoring well that's above or at 135, and everything else is in the green zone. So I do appreciate the district and their efforts through blending and their blending efforts to reduce the hardness of the water throughout the district. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, without additional comment, let us move then to On to the next item, staff presentations. There are none. 6.3, 6.4 is the general manager's report, which will give us an update on COVID, something I think we've heard of now.
That's right.
Years.
You've heard an awful lot about COVID. I have a little bit more to share, and then we actually have two additional short, very brief GM reports from others too. So let me just quickly review where we are with COVID. There have been no new cases at ACWD since my October report, so that's good news. With regard to vaccinations, we're a little over 81% fully vaccinated at ACWD. We had our vaccination clinic on November 2 here at district headquarters that was available to employees and to members of the public. And 60 vaccinations were administered at that clinic. And one employee received their first vaccination at that clinic. So I'd say that was a big success. We have a second vaccination clinic scheduled for December 2 at 1:30 p.m. And that again is available to employees, their families, members of the public, the members of the board. Of course, the board, many of you will be at the Aqua conference at that time, but it's available. And then as I'd previously reported, since September 21, we've been requiring unvaccinated employees to be tested weekly for COVID. And that program has been ongoing. It's been working well. However, we're in the process right now of changing our testing provider so that all of the costs associated with the testing would be covered by insurance. And then the turnaround time on the tests would be reduced further too. So we're making some improvements in that program. And then finally, because the board took action this evening, making findings that COVID continues to impact our ability to meet safely in person, we'll continue to host our public meetings virtually for the time being. We continue to monitor conditions and keep the board informed, but at this point, based upon the county's indoor mask mandates and the metrics that they use, it's likely that the earliest that those requirements may be lifted is perhaps December 28, but it's likely to, in my view, to be a little bit longer than that. And then depending on how long the county remains in the substantial community transmission tier, such requirements are likely to continue into January. So we'll continue to monitor conditions, but my own thought is we might not be in a position to return to in-person board meetings in January. But if things change, I'll obviously continue to update the board. So just a little bit of a glimpse into the uncertainty of the present and the possibilities in the future. So first of all, any questions on that report?
Any questions? There being none, please proceed.
Okay, our next GM report will be by our Director of Finance, John Wunderlich.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. So earlier this week, the CalPERS board met and made some decisions about the future asset allocations in their investment fund. And based on the decisions made by the board, they are going to be retaining a 6.8% discount rate, which is their current discount rate. So we're not seeing any kind of pressing need to make any changes at what we're doing at the district. But the next finance committee meeting in December, Ms. Grajeda, our accounting and treasury manager, will give a detailed presentation to the committee about the process CalPERS went through, as well as the results of that process, which does include some changes in asset allocations in the investment portfolio, as well as allowing for up to 5% leverage. And so that will be presented to the finance committee in December. And I know CalPERS is working toward implementing these updates by July 1st of next year.
I think. Does OPEB also apply on that?
No, our OPEB trust is in the California Employers Benefit Trust Fund, which is managed through CalPERS, but it is not a part of the pension fund. So this process was specific to investments in the pension fund.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the board? All right, do we have a third general manager's report?
Yeah, another brief GM report by our Director of Water Resources, Laura Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. I'm happy to report that we have completed the draft alternative update 2022 for the Niles Cone groundwater basin, which is posted on the district's website for public review and comment. The district's alternative update is not a plan amendment, but is a 5-year written assessment that describes and provides an update on the district's groundwater management efforts. Comments on the alternative update are due by 5 p.m. on December 6, 2021. And during the December 9th board meeting, regular board meeting, staff will be providing a very brief update on to the board on and the public on the comments that we receive and on the alternative update 2022. Staff will also request the board adopt a resolution at that meeting that would approve finalizing and submitting the alternative update to DWR. So that's my report on this item.
All right, thank you. Does that complete the staff reports? And
Yes, that completes our GM reports. Yes.
okay. Then let's move on then to director's comments and reports on meetings attended and agenda item request. Before we go into the reports, is there any agenda item requests from members of the board?
Director Weed, I'd like to, I noticed my meetings for the CLE workshops were not included. And I'd like to real quickly comment on those, the 3 workshops in October, if I may.
Yes, why don't you start? We'll go into the agenda.
Okay. There were 3 CLE workshops, which I signed up for and attended virtually over the month of October. Sigma, the groundwater adjudications, PFAS, legal tech and legal implementations, and the other one was homeless. Turns out it was more like homeless public agency obligations, which is a little interesting. Hearing the obligations primarily directed though at cities versus an agency like ourselves. The Sigma one was very, very fascinating in that how it really in the valley, the issues with who has water to pump, who's not pumping, and all of the interactions and workings of something that should have been, one would have expected to be easy, is not, and is a very interesting legal situation going on out in other areas to make any issues we've had with Sigma look like nothing. And the last one was PFAS, and I was kind of disappointed, and I need to dig. I really can't get my arms around PFAS. And one of the things I came away with from that was, and maybe Director Wong could correct me if I'm wrong, I know she's working still in the environmental field. There's like one study, according to what they had to say. And we appear to be going down this path of deciding parts per trillion, contaminant levels, et cetera, with not a lot of data. And I'm concerned about that. And I have other concerns about PFAS too, but I came away from that looking at it saying, wow, all this, it's so little data. So, and like I said, Director Wong's welcome to correct me, but I kind of came away from that saying, there's not a lot of data out there. So with that, that was it. I'll make it quick. Thank you.
I attended those same Zoom meetings. My understanding is to be putting on the agenda, it's one where we had expenses related to attending the meetings. And I don't believe there were any expenses incurred since we were AQUA members. So, thank you. The next is 7.1, which is a report from Directors Weed and Sethi on the Harris Ranch Conference of Regions 6 and 7 of AQUA. Director Sethi.
Before I go into my report, just to add on to Director Gunther's comments, and I direct this to our staff really. In reading through the funding different types of funding that are coming through on the infrastructure bill, there is a very large amount of money. It's in the billions of dollars to address the PFAS issue. And I wonder if we might want to take a look into how those funds are earmarked for what kind of specific projects, and whether, you know, I'm saying this very speculatively, you know, if we were ever to consider like a set of water purification facilities at our well fields to address this issue, this might be the time to take a look at trying to seize some of these federally available funds.
Yeah, I'll just say that we are watching the recent infrastructure bill and how these dollars will flow through what programs. And as I understand it right now, there's not much that's been actually earmarked. There are various categories that are identified and dollar totals. And so we're definitely watching how those will flow into various funding programs. And the timing may be good because we are working on PFAS solutions for our own agency. And so certainly we're hoping that those will line up.
Yes, I saw PFAS was singularly itemized as one funding area.
Yeah.
So that's where we might want to take a look. Okay, back to 7.1. I really haven't had much of a chance to talk to Director Weed. We both attended this set of meetings down in Coalinga. And upon reflecting on it, I feel like the two of us drove into a foreign country. It was in a ways bewildering, but also very educational to hear all of these people from the Central Valley talking about their issues, primarily, you know, related to agriculture and water supply. But I have a hard time saying this without insulting anybody that was there at the meeting. I was perplexed that about the uneven understanding of the issues that are related to the Central Valley in the context of all of the water supply issues across the state of California. And I thought the most enlightening period of time was the 1 hour lunch where Tim Quinn, the former executive director of Aqua, was sitting next to me. And we had State Senator Melissa Hurtado at our table as well, and she was one of the panelists. During her presentation, she said that she advocated getting rid of the State Water Board, that it was not responsible to the voters. These were not elected officials. And she's a Democrat. And her other fellow Democrats supported her, along with the Republican legislators that were there. And so I decided to tackle this issue with her during lunch and said, you know, if you look at the 10 hydrological regions of California, and I had just the prior week sat in 5 hours of the State Water Resources Control Board meeting, that you really need to walk in their shoes to see how difficult it is for them to try and balance all the needs of all the different regions across the state of California. And unfortunately, I felt that our local legislators, regardless of party affiliation, have only one view of the world, that we have an obligation to deliver as much water as we can to the central San Joaquin Valley, regardless of environmental concerns, concerns about the fishery industry, concerns about urban needs. Even though it was a brief conference, I found it very enlightening. And during that 1 hour lunch, I pointed out to Senator Hurtado, by the way, was elected to her city council in her mid-20s and then elected to the state Senate. She's one of the youngest people in the legislature in her second term as state senator at age 33. She has a background in healthcare, but very little knowledge about water. And so when I was explaining to her with Tim Quinn that, you know, a good 60% of the water in California goes to our nut industry and dates and other things that are high value crops, and that 70 to 80% of those crops are exported out of the country. And my conclusion is that we are exporting the water of California out of the state. That's what it amounts to. And I tried to, and she was querying me, well, why are you saying this and everything? And I said, well, listen, and I didn't want to insult her because NAFTA was passed, you know, just about the time she was born. And the fact is that before NAFTA, we grew row crops in the Central Valley, just like in the Salinas Valley. And when NAFTA passed and it allowed the importation of farm goods from Mexico and Canada, and then even it was opened up further to Latin America in general, we saw the transition since the early 1990s to the present, where people have moved to these high value crops, particularly the nut industry, where you cannot fallow the land when you're in a drought. These walnuts and almonds and pistachios and everything else they're growing, pecans, they require year-round water. And she said, well, all these numbers that you're citing are open to interpretation. And Tim spoke up for me and he said, no, I work at Stanford University. These are the state numbers. And Director Sethi is correct in stating that agriculture uses up all this water and contributes less than 3% to state GDP, whereas Silicon Valley uses about 1% and is the largest contributor to state GDP. And she kept saying, well, these numbers are all open to interpretation. Where do you get your numbers? And remember, she's an elected Democrat. And I said to her, you know, you would not have the support of your other Democrats in the legislature to get rid of the State Water Board if you really understood the complexity of the issues that they're working with. And her chief of staff, who was there at the luncheon, later came up to me and said, how would you like to be an advisor to the state senator? Which I took in good humor. But anyway, I'm looking forward to Director Weed's comments, but it was really like being in a foreign country. And what I felt most offended by, and I'm happy to say this in a public meeting, is we were listening to people discussing the issues of water in the Central Valley that are multimillionaires and even billionaires representing their industries. And it's like we're diametrically opposed, 180 degrees apart in understanding what the issues of water are in California. Really an eye-opener. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Director Sethi and I did have the opportunity to go down to Ferris Ranch and then made a fascinating trip crossing over to King City and seeing a whole part of the state. It's amazing. You fly over it and you realize there's a lot of open land there. But at the conference itself in Sigma, which was the theme there, and also on some of the earlier MCLE, it struck me that we're developing the basis of a water market. The monetary agreements were really water transfers, and it was noted at the meeting that they're talking about the ability to being able to trade their water for the highest and best use within the ag community. And some of those some leadership said, but of course the urban people can pay far more. And we can pay 100 times more than the average ag user can without a problem. So it really begs the question, do we have a water crisis in the state of California if you're an urban user willing to pay $2,000 an acre foot for the water, where the ag users are paying about 1% of that, and if they go over 1% of that, they start crying or are upset. That is the dichotomy. And it's something that's lost on the conservation and environmental community, that we do not have a real water problem in the urban areas in the state if we make it a market-based economy. And I think we're going in that direction. And Sigma, it will take us a major step in that direction. So, thank you.
Let me add one thing to Director Wheat's comment here. And I spoke to him about this on our trip back. We have attended, the two of us, numerous California Water Commission meetings when they were going through the determination of funding for the different WISA programs. And Temperance Flats was one of the big projects that was proposed for funding, up in the Fresno area on the San Joaquin River. And I actually was offended by the number of people there that are these very wealthy landowners and corporate owners that were insisting that the federal government and the state of California and the citizens of California, really, when you boil it down, should be paying for Temperance Flats if it's going to be built. And the fact that they couldn't come up with the funding, the blame is on the citizens of California. And I seriously disagree with that. As I told Director Weed, these are the very people that are the beneficiaries of the water that can be delivered to their farmland. It's not really communities of people, it's farmland. And they have the money to pay for it. But everyone that we were meeting with is expecting a handout from the federal government in the state of California to pay for it all. And it's so profit driven, it drives me crazy when I listen to the folks there. But, I represent, or Director Weed and I, all of us represent an urban water district. And so sometimes it pays to get outside of your own neighborhood over to the other side of the hill and listen to how the other side is thinking. And when we go to aqua conferences or statewide conferences in the water industry, it helps to, I think, have listened to the perspective of the other side. I'll leave it at that. I have another report here, 7.2, and since I've been a little bit of a motor mouth, I'm going to keep this very short. Water Education Foundation puts on a lot of good tours that I've been on in person. This Northern California tour was a virtual tour. And I just want to highlight a couple of things, really for the investigation of, for anybody that's interested. One, we don't understand Shasta Reservoir, Shasta Lake, very well. This is a lake that's 35 miles across in different tangents. And it's so important to the complexity of the water supply situation in Northern California, Central California. And because we're not on that that system, we don't think about it very much. But if you're the other water districts in Northern California, like Santa Clara Valley Water District, and you are dependent upon Shasta Lake or Contra Costa water, it puts your understanding of our Northern California water situation in a whole new perspective, because we really think about Oroville, but Shasta is just as important. Number two, the salmon industry is really starting to thrive right now. After 3 or 4 years, Badger Creek is fully loaded with salmon coming back up through the Sacramento River. And I think it was about 4 years ago, I reported on my visit to the Coleman National Fish Hatchery, which is just a real delight to visit. And I highly recommend. It's just south of Redding. If you're ever going up Highway 5, make a little detour, and you'll see one of the great fish hatcheries of the entire country. And the fishery report from San Pablo Bay right now, I'm reading articles that all the creeks, the Napa creeks, the Sonoma creeks, there's lots of Chinook and steelhead going up these creeks to their native habitats. So that's exciting to see. And the last thing I want to mention is, the Feather River. Lots of fish going up the Feather River too. The last thing I wanted to mention, which I also pointed out in the visit down to Harris Ranch to folks there, was what a magnificent job the Northern California Water Agency has been doing over the last 20 years. Even I didn't realize all of the extensive work and cooperative efforts that they have made to settle water entitlements, water disagreements, water usage, sharing of water. Our past board president is from that region as well and on that board. And we're so closely linked with Aqua, but I was really, really impressed with the Northern California Water Association. And I highly encourage folks to look it up. And I mentioned it to Tim Quinn and another gentleman that were joint presenters at the conference down in Coalinga. And Tim said, yeah, once a month, I look up everything that they're doing, because that's the model for what we need to do down in the Central Valley. And that's why I'm here today at this conference, is to pull those ideas from the Northern California Water Agency that have been turned out to be very practical over the last 20 years, and try to influence what's going on where they're kind of lost in the Central Valley right now. And so, again, I highly encourage everyone, take a look at their website, just go through it and see all of the progressive work that they've been doing. I'm actually, as a California citizen, very proud of all of the efforts that have been going on up there, and that people can creatively think out of the box and get things done. So thank you for my report on that.
All right. Well, thank you. That leaves us now to go into a closed session. If there's no other business for the open session. Thank you. So I'll let.
I'm happy to take us in, Acting President Weed, if you'd like.
Please.
Okay, it is now 9:20 p.m. and the board is going to go into closed session for 3 closed session items. Item 8.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, employee organization, operating engineers local 3, and ACWD Operators Association. Item 8.2 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, and John Wunderlich, unrepresented employees, management confidential professional employees. And item 8.3 is pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. Can now convene into closed session.
Thank you. So. In closed session. Thank you. Now we're recording. The board is now meeting and is returning to open session from closed session. And the board attorney, Pat Miyake, will read the appropriate statements.
Great, thank you. So it is now 10:40 and the board convened in closed session for 3 items. Item 8.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, Jonathan Wunderlich, and Stacy Q, employee organization, operating engineers local 3, and ACWD Operators Association. In that closed session, the board received a report from the agency designated negotiators. For item 8.2, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jennifer Solito, and Jonathan Wunderlich, unrepresented employees, management confidential professional employees. And in that closed session, board also received a report from the agency designated negotiators. For item 8.3, pursuant to California Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D2, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one potential case. No action was taken in that closed session. And that concludes the open session reports from the closed session.
Thank you. And do we need to read something into the record at this point?
So now would be a time to go to item 9. And 9.1 would be the first item on the agenda.
Okay. Let us then move to item 9.9 and turn this over to the administrator, to our staff.
Yeah, and I'll just toss it directly to our HR manager, Jennifer Solito.
Right, item 9.1 is a consideration of terms and conditions for a successor memorandum of understanding between the Alameda County Water District and the Operating Engineers Local Number 3. The district has been negotiating with the Operating Engineers Local Number 3, also known as OE3, towards a successor memorandum of understanding since October of 2020. The previous MOU was in effect from April 1st, 2018 through March 31st, 2021. The parties were successful in reaching a tentative agreement for the terms and conditions of a successor MOU during the bargaining process, and the terms and conditions were ratified through membership vote on October 29th, 2021. During closed session item 8.1, the board discussed the terms. A summary of the key terms and conditions are as follows. The term of the agreement is April 1st, 2021 through March 31st, 2025. Regarding wages, there is no cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 21-22. Effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2022, all OE3 classification pay is increased by 3.25%. Effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2023, all OE3 classification pay is increased by 3.25%. And effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2024, all OE3 classification pay is increased by 3.14%. Regarding implementation of the 2020 classification and compensation study, effective the pay period following board adoption, all OE3 represented classifications shall be adjusted to meet the 75th percentile of the compensation study and associated internal classification links. If market adjustments result in a classification range increase of less than 3%, incumbents in those classifications will receive the equivalent adjustment of a 3% lump sum payment to occur in December 2021. For employees hired prior to the first pay period following board adoption with salaries at or over the 75th percentile will have their existing salaries frozen until future general cost of living increases applied to the base classification schedules exceed their existing salaries. Classifications that are ineligible for general cost of living increases due to exceeding the adjusted salaries will receive a lump sum cash payment equivalent up to the annual COLA received by the adjusted classification salaries. Lump sum payments will occur in November of each fiscal year. All OE3 classification descriptions are amended as included in the study. Regarding overtime, all hours worked over 12 consecutive hours in a 24-hour period will be paid at 2 times the regular rate of pay. Regarding active employee medical benefits, effective the benefit plan year 2022, the dual coverage benefit receives a one-time adjustment to 50% of the current calendar year 2021 Kaiser rates for new benefit amounts of $406.82 for employee only, $813.64 for employee plus one dependent, and $1,057.73 for employee plus family. Effective the benefit plan year 2022, employees who enroll in health coverage and select a plan with a premium lower than the flex dollar allowance, which is unchanged for the term of the MOU, they will receive their remainder as compensation, capped at 75% of the corresponding eligible dual coverage benefit. The corresponding maximums are as follows: $305.11 for employee only, $610.23 for employee plus one dependent, and $793.30 for employee plus family. Regarding crane certification pay, amendments to the number and types of positions that may receive crane certification pay were made, and in order to distinguish the pay levels. The telescopic boom fixed cab or TSS certification pay will be $300 a month, and the service truck crane operator or STC certification pay will be $250 a month. Regarding sick leave bonus, this bonus is eliminated in exchange for an increase of 8 hours floating holiday time per fiscal year for a new total of 36 hours floating holiday pay per fiscal year. Regarding deferred compensation, the district will implement a match of up to $500 a month starting calendar year 2024. Other amendments are administrative and non-substantive in nature and are also included in the successor MOU. And these represent the key economic and business terms. As such, staff recommends that the board by motion adopt the terms and conditions as outlined and authorize the general manager to execute a successor MOU with OE3. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from members of the board? No. Do we need a vote on that item?
Yes, you need a motion, a second, and a vote.
I'll move staff recommendation or the recommendation on mine.
Do we have
I
a
will
second?
second Director Sethi.
Roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Sethi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Please, then we'll move on to item 9.2. A consideration of the amendments to the memorandum of understanding between the Alameda County Water District and the ACWD Operators Association.
I'll make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Well, we haven't read this item out yet.
Oh, I see.
This one's a little bit shorter than the last one, but still quite detailed.
Sorry to jump the gun.
Sorry. I'll jump right in. On July 8th, 2021, the board approved the terms and conditions of the successor MOU between the district and the ACWD Operators Association, also known as the OA, following the successful attainment of a tentative agreement through the bargaining process. Part of these terms and conditions included various, quote, "me too" clauses related to the OE3 union contract. Specifically, the OA terms included that if OE3 reaches agreement with the district and receives a benefit that exceeds the same negotiated benefit for the association in specific areas, the OA will receive the same benefit. The specific areas include the implementation of the 2020 classification and compensation study, the market percentile placement and the lump sum payments for fiscal year 21-22, the general cost of living increases for fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24, the flex dollar contribution to active employee medical benefits, and the dual health coverage benefit. The following items 8.1 and 9.1 tonight, the district has completed bargaining and adopted the terms and conditions of an MOU with OE3. The OE3 terms trigger a few adjustments related to the OA Me Too clauses as outlined as follows. As such, staff presents this item to memorialize these changes and seek confirmation of board approval. The following outlines the Me Too clauses and whether or not a change occurs due to the OE3 terms. Regarding the 2020 classification and compensation study, the terms are consistent between OE3 and OA related to the study, the market percentile placement, and the lump sum payments for fiscal year 21-22, and no change is required. Regarding the flex dollar contribution to active employee medical benefits and the dual health coverage benefit, the terms are consistent between OE3 and OA and no changes occurring. Regarding the general cost of living increases for fiscal year 22-23 and 23-24. For fiscal year 22-23, the terms for OA included a 3% wage increase, and the OE3 terms include a 3.25% increase. As such, for fiscal year 22-23, the wage increase for OA is increased by 0.25% up to a total of 3.25%. For fiscal year 23-24, the OA terms included a 2.75% wage increase, and the OE3 terms include a 3.25% increase. As such, for fiscal year 23-24, wage increase for the OA is increased by 0.5% to 3.25%. This is the extent of the Me Too clause impacts. As such, staff recommends that the board by motion adopt these amendments to the OA MOU as outlined in accordance with the terms and conditions previously approved, and authorize the general manager to amend and execute the MOU accordingly.
Okay,
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
I endorse everything Ms. Salido said, and I will make a motion to approve the staff recommendation on 9.2.
Second? Director Gunther is seconded. Roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Steffi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. So we now move to item 9.3, consideration of amendments in the management confidential professional MCP employee compensation schedule / handbook.
This is the shortest of all, and Ms. Lita will read this one out as well.
Try to read fast. The district has been in bargaining with both its union groups for the last year. Throughout the process, the board has approved various amendments to the compensation and benefits of unrepresented management, confidential, and professional employees, also known as MCP. These changes were made to the active employee medical benefits and in order to implement the 2020 district-wide classification and compensation study. For the record, the board took these actions on June 10th, 2021, and again on September 9th, 2021. With the conclusion of bargaining for both union groups and the successful attainment of successor MOUs, in order to continue to maintain equity across employee groups, staff recommends further amendments be made to the MCP compensation and benefits to address the future year general cost of living adjustments and equity related to other economic benefits. The amendments proposed to the MCP employee compensation schedule are as follows. Related to section 1.1 salary increases, increase the lump sum payments for certain eligible classifications as a result of the 2021 classification and compensation study by 1% to a new total up to 3% for fiscal year 21-22. Effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2022, all MCP classification pay is increased by 3.25%. Effective the pay period that includes July 1st, 2023, all MCP classification pay is increased by 3.25%. And lastly, effective the pay period that includes July 1, 2024, all MCP pay is increased by 3.14%. Regarding section 12.2 deferred compensation, effective January 2024, the district's ongoing match to employees' contributions to a 401A plan shall be increased by $500. This results in matching contributions of up to $2,250 per year, beginning January 1st, 2024, and reducing down to $1,000 per year, beginning January 1st, 2026. Staff recommends that the board by motion amend the MCP compensation schedule as described here verbally and as provided in attachment A to be included in the meeting minutes, and authorize the general manager to amend the MCP compensation handbook accordingly. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have a motion to approve this 9.3?
I'll move staff recommendation.
Moved by Director Gunther,
Second. Oh, go ahead, Judy.
seconded by Judy Wong. Director Wong, roll call, please.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Steffi,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. All right, do we have any other items to bring before the board?
I have something I would like to share with the board quickly, and I would like to actually, when we get back into in-person meetings, bring this in to the district. I found was going through a box of old stuff from my father from the water district and found some very interesting items. And one of them, well, first of all, he had the address and phone numbers of every employee in the district that was typed up by the district secretary, which just historically is nice to go through because it reminds me of all the people I grew up with that he worked with. But I also found the memorandum of understanding for the employee contract that was signed for the fiscal years 1982 to 84, which I'm trying to highlight right here. And it's, of course, my dad went by the same name I did. And it has the imprint of this employee agreement is in such fine print. I have to read it with a little lens here because it's in such fine print. But it is really interesting to go through as a document to see the parallels and then how much the district has grown in terms of how it's compensated its employees. It has every classification in here and the salary schedule. It's quite fascinating to actually go through this. So this is 40 years old right now. And I was, and of course it has the seal of ACWD on the front. And it just shows you how much our district has changed in 40 years. It's amazing.
All right. Well, thank you for historical artifacts. Is there any other items then or issues by members of the board? The staff?
That should be it, Vice President Weed.
All right, then let us adjourn at before 11 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I
All
want
right,
to just
thanks,
say
everybody.
thank you to all of our employees too. I'm glad we